There are moments in history that defy logic, events etched into the past, yet wrapped in silence. A sealed tomb with no name, a vanished army with no trace, a cryptic inscription carved into stone in a language no living soul can read. These aren't tales from myth or fiction. They are the real puzzles our ancestors left behind. Whispers from a world that once was, and perhaps still lingers just beyond understanding. For every answer history gives us, it hides 1,000 more in shadows. Who killed the king in the dead of night, and why was his name erased from every record? What treasure did a dying empire bury beneath the earth, never to be found again? And how did entire civilizations rise, flourish, and disappear, without leaving so much as a whisper? Tonight, we open the vault, not to solve these mysteries, but to sit with them, to let their weight settle into us and wonder what truths lie buried beneath the dust of time. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into the world's most haunting historical mysteries, those that still have no answers. The desert wind whispers across the ruins of Alexandria, carrying the scent of salt from the distant sea and dust from 1,000 forgotten stories. Somewhere beneath this once glorious city, if the old accounts are to be believed, lies the body of a man who sought to conquer the world and almost succeeded. Alexander the Great. A name that echoes across history like a storm. A man of myth, of ambition, of empire. And yet, for all the monuments that rose in his name, his final resting place has never been found. When Alexander died in 323 BC in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar II in Babylon, his death sent shockwaves through the ancient world. He was only 32. No one had expected the man who had marched across continents, from the fields of Greece to the mountains of India, to fall so swiftly, so mysteriously. Some said it was fever, others whispered of poison, but the enigma didn't end with his final breath. It began there. His generals quarreled over what should be done with his remains. According to historical sources, his body was to be returned to Macedonia, to be buried alongside his ancestors. But the funeral procession was intercepted. Ptolemy, one of Alexander's most trusted companions, seized the body and diverted it to Egypt. Why? Perhaps for legitimacy, perhaps for power, perhaps for reverence. Ptolemy would go on to found a dynasty that ruled Egypt for centuries, and possessing the body of the divine king may have been his key to doing so. In Alexandria, a city Alexander himself had founded, a tomb was built. Accounts from the centuries that followed speak of a grand mausoleum. Some called it the Soma, where Alexander's body was housed. Visitors came from across the known world to pay their respects. Julius Caesar is said to have wept before the body. Augustus allegedly crowned Alexander with a golden diadem. Even Caligula, centuries later, is rumored to have taken his breastplate. The tomb became a symbol of power, of legacy, of something larger than life. And then, silence. The records fade. The descriptions stop. By the 4th century AD, Christian and later Islamic influences reshaped the spiritual map of the region, and the tomb of Alexander was no longer mentioned. No one can say exactly when or how it disappeared. Was it destroyed in a riot? Hidden beneath new buildings? Swallowed by the earth in one of the city's many earthquakes? Archaeologists have searched for it for over a century. Dozens of locations in Alexandria have been proposed, beneath modern neighborhoods, under ancient catacombs, near the supposed site of the royal quarter. Some point to a structure unearthed near the Mosque of Nebi Daniel, where reports from the 1800s describe a grand subterranean chamber that might have held a royal figure. But excavation was halted. Political instability, urban sprawl and the simple chaos of millennia have kept the truth buried. Others look beyond Alexandria altogether. One theory suggests that the body never reached Egypt at all, that it was lost, stolen, or buried in secret elsewhere. Some have even speculated that Alexander's remains lie in Vergina, among the royal tombs of ancient Macedonia, misidentified and mislabeled. And then there are those who believe the body may have been destroyed, either intentionally, to prevent it from becoming a symbol, or accidentally, by time and neglect. And what of the body itself? Plutarch and other ancient writers describe something strange. Alexander's corpse, they claimed, did not decompose. It remained uncorrupted for days, even weeks. A sign of divinity, they said, a miracle, or perhaps a myth that grew to match the man. Still, the questions remain. Why would the tomb of one of history's greatest figures vanish without a trace? How could a structure so revered, so visited, be forgotten so completely? And why has no one, not even with modern technology, been able to find it? Perhaps the answer is buried beneath the markets and apartment buildings of modern Alexandria. Perhaps it was dismantled stone by stone, repurposed, erased. Or perhaps the story itself has grown too large, layered with centuries of retelling, distorted by time, until the truth has become indistinguishable from legend. And yet, something about the mystery lingers. The idea that somewhere, beneath layers of dust and stone, the conqueror still rests, waiting. His body, intact or gone, remains a symbol, not just of power, but of impermanence, that even the greatest among us can vanish, that memory itself can be lost brick by brick, breath by breath. So we ask, where is Alexander the Great? And in searching for him, are we really looking for a tomb or for a piece of our own forgotten history? The mists of northern Britain hang low over the moors, rolling like ancient ghosts across the highlands. Here, where the wind cuts like a blade and the sky is often the color of iron, something once vanished, utterly, without warning, without a trace. No bones, no graves, no trophies. Only silence. It was here, perhaps, or somewhere nearby, that Rome's legendary 9th Legion marched into the north, and was never seen again. The 9th Legion, Legio IX Hispana, was one of the most storied units in the Roman army. Forged in the fires of the Republic, blooded in the campaigns of Caesar, and stationed in the far reaches of the empire, it was both feared and admired. By the 1st century AD, the 9th had seen action across Gaul, Hispania, and Germania, and then they were stationed in Britannia, Rome's newest, most unruly frontier. Records show the 9th was based in Eboracum, modern-day York. From there, they were deployed against the rebellious tribes of the north, fierce warriors who knew the land, who vanished into forests and struck from shadows. Around 120 AD, the trail of the 9th grows cold. One moment they are part of the imperial war machine. The next, they are gone. So what happened? The most widely accepted theory suggests the legion was wiped out in battle, ambushed by hostile tribes during a campaign into Caledonia, present-day Scotland. Tacitus, though not explicit, hints at Roman struggles in the region. Later inscriptions and military records show replacements being sent to Britain, possibly to fill a gaping void. But no detailed account of such a battle exists. No Roman historian wrote of the 9th's final stand. And Rome, a civilization obsessed with order and legacy, left behind no epitaph for the lost legion. Some historians argue the 9th was not destroyed, but merely redeployed. Fragments of inscriptions suggest that elements of the legion might have been transferred to the Rhine, or even to the eastern provinces. Yet none of these references are conclusive. The records are incomplete, the names unclear. Could the ninth have been quietly disbanded, their shame hidden from history? Or were they absorbed into another unit, their identity erased by bureaucracy and time? The mystery deepens when we consider what is missing. Not just the legion, but any trace of their fate. No mass graves, no battlefield debris, no captured standards, no memorials raised by victorious enemies. In a region that has yielded countless artifacts from Roman Britain, the ninth's absence is striking. Over time, the disappearance has inspired legends. Some say the legion was lured deep into the wild north and destroyed in a single, brutal ambush, their weapons rusting beneath centuries of moss and peat. Others believe survivors of the massacre fled into the wilderness, abandoning Rome and assimilating into the tribes they once fought. A few even whisper of betrayal, that the ninth was left to die by political rivals within the empire, their fate sealed not on the battlefield, but in the halls of power. And then there are the more speculative theories, ideas that linger on the edges of scholarship, that the ninth crossed into a realm of myth, becoming part of Britain's folklore, that their disappearance was not merely a historical event, but a cultural rupture, an echo of Rome's limits in the face of untamed nature. Some have even suggested supernatural causes, cursed ground, divine punishment, or intervention by forces lost to history. These ideas, though fantastical, persist because the silence left behind is so complete. In modern times, writers and filmmakers have embraced the mystery. The ninth has become the subject of novels, documentaries, and epic dramas. Yet with each retelling, the core question remains unanswered. How could an entire Roman legion vanish into the fog without leaving a trace? Perhaps the truth lies buried beneath a field somewhere in Scotland, awaiting rediscovery. Or perhaps it has already been found, scattered among countless artifacts, misidentified and forgotten in museum basements. It is possible that one day, a tablet or a tombstone will emerge, revealing the final chapter of the ninth's story. Or perhaps the silence will remain, more powerful than any answer could ever be. And so we are left with the question, was the Ninth Legion truly lost to history, or have we simply not known where to look? In the quiet town of Hamelin, nestled along the Weser River in northern Germany, cobblestone streets wind past timber-framed houses, and a church bell marks the slow passage of time. It is a picturesque place, peaceful, serene. But here, behind the quaint facades and tourist signs, lingers one of the darkest and most haunting legends in European history. On the walls of the town's church, there once stood a chilling inscription. In the year 1284, on the day of Saints John and Paul, 130 children born in Hamelin were seduced by a piper dressed in many colors and lost at the place of execution near the coffin. The date was June 26th, and what happened on that day has never been fully understood. Most know the story from fairy tales, the tale of the Pied Piper, a mysterious man in colorful clothing who arrived in Hamelin during a plague of rats. The townspeople, desperate, offered to pay him if he could rid them of the vermin. He played his pipe, and the rats followed him to the river, where they drowned. But when the townspeople refused to pay, he returned, not for money, but for their children. He played once more, and the children followed, never to return. But behind this familiar folklore lies a deeper, more disturbing truth, one supported by centuries-old records, stained with the silence of what might have actually occurred. The tale is not merely a fable. The disappearance of the children is recorded in church registers, town chronicles, and even on stained glass windows dating back to the 14th century. Something did happen in Hamelin. Something real, and to this day, no one knows exactly what it was. The earliest versions of the account do not mention rats at all. That detail appeared much later, possibly added to make the story more palatable or moralistic. Instead, the original accounts speak plainly of a tragedy, a mass disappearance. Children taken or lost, a town left in grief, a memory so painful it was said that for generations afterward, no music was allowed on the street where the children were last seen. What could have happened? Some historians suggest a literal interpretation, that the children were victims of disease or famine, and the tale of the piper was a symbolic way of processing collective trauma. Others propose that the children were not children in the modern sense, but rather youths, young adults, who may have been recruited or forced into migration during a period of colonization. Around the same time, German settlers were moving eastward into regions like Transylvania and Poland. Was the piper a real figure, a land agent perhaps, who led the young away with promises of a better life? Another theory speaks of the Children's Crusade, a poorly documented movement around the same era in which thousands of children set out on a holy mission to the Holy Land, many of whom were never seen again. Could Hamelin's youth have joined a similar cause, only to be lost to history in lands far from home? There are also darker possibilities. Some have speculated that the children were victims of mass abduction, or worse, sold into servitude. Others believe that the entire population may have succumbed to a mass psychogenic illness or religious frenzy. In medieval Europe, the line between vision and madness was often blurred. A single charismatic figure, a man with a pipe and a strange coat, might have seemed divine, even irresistible. And then there are the more folkloric suggestions, that the piper was a symbol of death itself, that the children, perhaps victims of a plague, were led away from the town as part of a ritual separation, buried in a mass grave outside the town walls. In this interpretation, the piper is not a villain, but a psychopomp, a guide to the afterlife. Some even point to geological explanations. Could a natural event, an earthquake, a landslide, have swallowed part of the population? Or might they have wandered into a cave system, never to emerge? Hamelin lies near limestone terrain, riddled with underground passages. Could the story mask a tragedy lost beneath the earth? Whatever the truth, Hamelin has never forgotten. The street where the children were last seen, Bungalowsenstrasse, is still marked, and to this day, no music is played there. The town embraces its legend, with festivals and performances, yet behind the pageantry lies something solemn, a recognition that the story is not merely entertainment, but a puzzle, one with roots in grief and loss. Why did 130 children vanish? Who or what was the piper? Was he a man, a metaphor, a myth, or all three at once? Centuries have passed, and still the echoes of those vanished footsteps ring faintly through Hamelin's narrow alleys. The records are few, the answers uncertain, but the memory endures, and in that enduring silence, the mystery deepens. What truly happened in Hamelin on that summer day in 1284? The Sahara stretches outward in all directions, an ocean of golden silence. Beneath the blistering sun and the shifting dunes, secrets lie buried, secrets so old they predate empires, so quiet they may never be found. Somewhere, perhaps deep beneath this sea of sand, rests the fate of an entire army. 20,000 men, armed, trained, vanished. This is the story of the lost army of Cambyses II. In the 6th century BC, Cambyses II, son of Cyrus the Great and ruler of the Persian Empire, set his gaze on Egypt. After a brutal and swift campaign, he conquered the kingdom and declared himself pharaoh. But conquest, for Cambyses, was not enough. He sought domination not just of nations, but of their sacred traditions. And in the western desert, far beyond the Nile, lay the oracle of Amun at the oasis of Siwa, an ancient mystical center of power and prophecy. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, Cambyses sent an army of 50,000 soldiers to destroy the oracle and assert his rule over the spiritual heart of Egypt. They marched west from Thebes into the burning sands of the western desert. For 7 days, they crossed arid terrain, reaching the city of Oasis, likely modern-day Karga. Then they continued on, deeper into the desert. And then, nothing. Not a single man returned. Not a single body was found. No weapons, no armor, no bones. Herodotus writes that after entering the desert, the army was overtaken by a massive sandstorm, so powerful that it swallowed every last soldier. Buried alive beneath the dunes, their fate sealed by the wind. It's a compelling story. But is it true? For centuries, many dismissed it as legend, a dramatic flourish by Herodotus, who often blended myth with history. After all, the idea of an entire army disappearing without a trace sounds more like a parable than a battlefield report. But modern scholars and archaeologists have begun to look more closely. Could such a storm truly have occurred? In the harsh environment of the Egyptian desert, sudden and violent sandstorms are not uncommon. Walls of dust can sweep across the landscape with terrifying speed, disorienting and overwhelming even the most experienced travelers. An army caught in such a storm, especially if low on water or poorly prepared, could indeed be buried in moments, stripped of all visibility, cut off from supplies, lost to the landscape. Yet some experts question the logistics. Why would Cambyses send so many troops into such hostile terrain with so little margin for error? And why have no remains, human or otherwise, been discovered in the intervening millennia? Several expeditions over the past century have attempted to find the truth. In the 1990s, twin brothers Angelo and Alfredo Castiglione, Italian archaeologists, claimed to have found bronze weapons, arrowheads, and even a human rib near an ancient caravan route between Dakhla and Siwa. Their findings sparked excitement and controversy. Critics argued the artifacts could have belonged to a different period or been left by other travelers. The desert does not give up its secrets easily. Other theories have emerged. Some suggest the army may never have reached the desert at all. That internal dissent, mutiny, or a catastrophic failure in command led to the men being massacred closer to their point of origin. Others speculate they were ambushed by native tribes or fell into hidden ravines and salt marshes that dot the desert's edge. And then there are the more esoteric ideas. Some suggest that the army's disappearance was not merely a military failure, but a spiritual one. That the Oracle of Amun, a place said to possess divine knowledge, somehow cursed the soldiers who sought to destroy it. While no mainstream historian endorses such claims, they persist in the popular imagination, a place of prophecy, confronting an army of conquest. Was this divine retribution, or poetic storytelling from a time when myth and history were inseparable? One fact remains certain: there is no definitive evidence, no graveyard of shields, no fossilized footprints, just the desert and its endless silence. We are left once more with questions. Was the army swallowed by a sandstorm, as Herodotus claimed? Were they lost to heat and thirst, to treachery, or to miscalculation? Or is the entire episode a parable, crafted to warn future kings that some places, no matter how powerful they become, cannot be tamed? The sands continue to shift. The wind continues to blow, and beneath it all, if the story is true, 20,000 men may still lie waiting, untouched, unseen, entombed by time. And so we ask, in a desert that keeps its dead and buries its truths, is the lost army of Cambyses II still out there? The Niger River curves through the ancient heart of West Africa, its waters winding past golden plains, dense forests, and cities that once shimmered with wealth and power. Along its banks, the great empire of Mali once rose to brilliance, its markets filled with gold, its scholars with knowledge, its rulers with ambition that reached beyond the known world. And among those rulers, one stands apart, not for the riches he brought, but for the mystery he left behind. Mansa Abu Bakari II. The year was roughly 1311, and Mali stood at the height of its glory. Yet instead of ruling his kingdom, Abu Bakari chose to abandon it. According to historical accounts, most notably from the famed Arab historian al-Umari, who documented the testimony of Mansa Musa, Abu Bakari launched not one, but two expeditions into the Atlantic Ocean, determined to reach the edge of the world. His first fleet, he claimed, was massive. 200 ships were said to have set sail, each laden with food, water, gold, and sailors. Only one returned. The survivors spoke of an endless current, a violent force that pulled the other ships westward, into the unknown. They never came back. But Abu Bakari was not deterred. Instead, he prepared a second expedition, larger, grander, and led by himself. According to Mansa Musa, who later became emperor in his place, Abu Bakari abdicated the throne, entrusted the empire to him, and departed with 2,000 ships. Then, nothing. No word, no witness, no return. What became of Mansa Abu Bakari II and his fleet? The question has haunted historians and storytellers for centuries. Some believe the expedition perished at sea, overwhelmed by storms, starvation, or the sheer immensity of the Atlantic. In the 14th century, even experienced navigators lacked accurate instruments, and the ocean was an abyss of uncertainty. The Gulf of Guinea, with its unpredictable currents and powerful undertows, may have claimed them long before they glimpsed new land. But others wonder, what if they succeeded? There are those who suggest that Abu Bakari and his fleet may have reached the shores of the Americas, long before Columbus ever set sail. Some point to oral traditions in the Caribbean and parts of Central and South America that speak of dark-skinned seafarers arriving from the east, bringing new customs and objects of African origin. A few artifacts, metal alloys, and botanical samples have been cited as potential evidence, though none definitively link to Mali. In Mexico, murals at sites such as La Venta have sparked speculation with their depictions of figures that some claim resemble African features. Linguistic traces, cultural similarities, and ancient carvings have all been offered as subtle hints of a forgotten connection. Yet the academic consensus remains cautious. Most of this evidence is circumstantial, interpretive, or coincidental. No shipwrecks, no clear written records, no unambiguous trace of a West African expedition. Still, the very existence of the story, recorded by al-Umari just decades after the fact, lends it weight. Mansa Musa, a man whose word carried global respect, spoke of the voyage as fact, not legend. He did not describe Abu Bakari's disappearance with grief or shame, but with admiration, as if his predecessor had done something noble, something daring. If the expedition did fail, why speak of it at all? Was this voyage an act of madness or a vision? Did Abu Bakari seek new lands to conquer, or truths to discover? Was he chasing glory or fleeing the burdens of rule? And if he did reach another shore, did he live out his days in silence, cut off from his homeland, remembered only in whispers? In Mali, oral tradition keeps the story alive. Some griots still speak of the emperor who sailed into the setting sun, never to return, his fate lost to the waves. Others suggest he did return, changed, unrecognizable, transformed by the journey in ways no one could understand. And then there is the symbolism. In a world where most kings fortified their borders, Abu Bakari broke them. In an era when the ocean was considered an edge, a void, he saw it as a path, He was a ruler who stepped off the map and into legend. The Niger still flows. The Atlantic still waits. And somewhere between the two, in the silence where history fades into myth, the question lingers. Did Mansa Abu Bakari II vanish into failure or into discovery? Along the crumbling walls of the mortuary temple of Ramses III at Medinet Habu, intricate carvings stretch across ancient stone. Warriors in strange attire, ships locked in fierce battle, chaotic scenes of fire, collapse, and survival. Here, in hieroglyphs and images nearly 3,200 years old, the story of a forgotten war is preserved, a story that speaks of a terrifying enemy, an enemy the Egyptians called simply the Sea Peoples. It was the 12th century BC, and the known world was unraveling. The mighty empires of the Bronze Age, Mycenaean Greece, the Hittites of Anatolia, the Mitanni, the city-states of Canaan, and even Egypt itself, were all rocked by a wave of destruction. Cities burned, trade routes vanished, scripts were lost. Entire civilizations collapsed within a single century, and at the heart of this upheaval, again and again, appear the Sea Peoples. But who were they? The Egyptian records describe them as a confederation of tribes or nations, foreign invaders arriving by land and sea. Names such as the Peliset, Jeker, Denyen, Shurdan, and Shekelesh appear in inscriptions, but their origins remain cloaked in ambiguity. The Egyptians depicted them with feathered helmets, horned headdresses, and round shields, distinct from their own soldiers or known allies. They were not merely raiders. They came with women and children in wagons and ships, suggesting not just conquest, but migration. Or perhaps something more desperate. Exile. Collapse. Mainstream scholars have long debated the identities behind these names. Some propose that the Sea Peoples were displaced groups from the Aegean, possibly Mycenaeans fleeing a crumbling homeland. Others suggest they were Western Anatolian tribes, Sardinians, Cypriots, or even early Philistines. Linguistic links, pottery styles, and DNA studies have offered clues, but none conclusive enough to paint a full picture. And the timing only deepens the mystery. The Sea Peoples did not strike randomly. Their appearance coincides with what modern historians call the Bronze Age collapse, a domino effect of destruction that spanned from Greece to Mesopotamia between 1200 and 1100 BC. The Hittite capital of Hattusa was reduced to rubble. Ugarit, once a thriving port city, was swallowed by flame and forgotten for millennia. Trade networks that had endured for centuries vanished in the span of a single generation. Were the Sea Peoples the cause of this collapse, or its consequence? Some theories suggest that climate change, drought, and famine may have destabilized regions, forcing mass movements of people in search of resources. Earthquakes may have crippled cities, while internal revolts weakened empires from within. In this view, the Sea Peoples were not a singular force, but the human face of a larger unraveling, waves of displaced populations, drawn to the weakening edges of collapsing powers. Yet the Egyptian records speak of organized invasions. Ramses III, in the 12th century BC, claimed to have defeated them in a decisive naval battle at the mouth of the Nile. His inscriptions boast of victory, of slaughter, of Egypt preserved. And yet, even in victory, Egypt would never again rise to the heights it once knew. The world had changed. The old systems were gone. Curiously, traces of the Sea Peoples appear to have been absorbed into the new order. Some settled in Canaan and became what we later recognize as the Philistines, mentioned frequently in the Hebrew Bible. Archaeological digs in places like Ashkelon and Ekron reveal a blending of Aegean and local Levantine cultures, suggesting that whoever the Sea Peoples were, they didn't just disappear. They adapted. They became part of what came next. Still, their identity eludes us. Were they refugees from a natural catastrophe? Raiders taking advantage of a world in chaos? Mercenaries turned conquerors? A vast confederation of displaced peoples driven by hunger, war, or hope. And why does so little survive from their own perspective? No records in their own language, no royal inscriptions, no manifestos of conquest. Everything we know comes from those who fought them and feared them. Perhaps that's what makes them so haunting. The Sea Peoples are a ghost army in history, shadows flickering at the edge of collapse. They came from the sea, brought fire to empires, and then were gone. Their legacy is not built in monuments, but in the silence that followed. The centuries of darkness where writing ceased, trade halted, and the memory of what came before nearly vanished. So we wonder, who were they, truly? And what does their story tell us about how civilizations fall, not in a single blow, but in waves, each one more mysterious than the last? Beneath the rolling hills and quiet pastures of southern Italy, the Busento River winds its way through the city of Cosenza. Its waters are slow, unassuming, and silent, holding no visible trace of the empire-shaking secrets they are rumored to conceal. Yet, according to ancient legend, somewhere beneath this very riverbed lies a fortune beyond imagination. A treasure fit for kings, buried not in a tomb of stone, but in the earth itself, hidden forever beneath the flowing current. This is the mystery of Alaric's treasure. In the year 410 AD, the city of Rome fell to the Visigoths. It was a moment that sent shockwaves through the ancient world. Rome, the eternal city, had stood for centuries as the heart of the Western world, its walls considered impenetrable. But Alaric, the warrior king of the Visigoths, shattered that illusion. He entered the city with his army, and for 3 days, Rome was plundered, its wealth stripped, its dignity broken. Gold, silver, priceless artifacts, and sacred relics, some said even the spoils of the Second Temple of Jerusalem, taken centuries earlier by Titus, were seized. But Alaric's conquest was brief. Just months later, as he led his people southward through the Italian peninsula, seeking passage to North Africa, he fell ill. He died suddenly near Cosenza, far from the empire he had defied, and far from the homeland he had long been denied. What happened next has become the stuff of legend. According to accounts first recorded by the historian Jordanes in the 6th century, Alaric's warriors sought to bury their king in a manner befitting his greatness, but without inviting desecration. They allegedly diverted the Busento River, constructed a tomb in the dry riverbed, and placed Alaric within it, surrounded by his weapons, his armor, and the unimaginable treasure looted from Rome. Once the tomb was sealed, the waters were allowed to return, erasing all trace of their work. To ensure the secrecy of the location, the laborers tasked with the burial were killed, their knowledge extinguished. But was this only myth? Or could it be true? The tale is certainly dramatic. A river diverted by hand, a burial chamber constructed in secret, an entire workforce silenced. But it's not entirely implausible. The Visigoths were a disciplined force, and the redirection of a river, even temporarily, was not beyond the capabilities of ancient engineers. The Romans had done it. Others had as well. And if any group had the motivation to protect their king's grave from desecration and looting, it was a displaced people whose leader had delivered them their greatest symbolic victory. For centuries, treasure hunters, historians, and adventurers have speculated about the truth of Alaric's burial. Many believe that the treasure, if it exists, remains beneath the Busento to this day, undisturbed by time. The exact location of the grave is unknown, and no physical evidence has ever been recovered. In the 19th century, German poet August von Platen immortalized the tale in verse, fueling renewed interest and romanticizing the idea of the river's hidden secret. In more recent times, archaeological interest has increased. Ground-penetrating radar and modern excavation techniques offer tantalizing possibilities, but Italian authorities have been cautious. The river flows through populated areas, and any excavation would risk disrupting local infrastructure and the natural environment. Moreover, without definitive evidence or a specific target, such efforts remain speculative and expensive. Some scholars suggest that the treasure may never have existed at all. They point out that the sack of Rome in 410, though historically significant, was not as materially destructive as later plundering would be. By the early 5th century, Rome's political and economic power had already declined. Much of its wealth had moved eastward to Constantinople. Perhaps the Visigoths took what they could, but not the legendary fortunes that later stories imagine. And yet, there are strange coincidences that keep the legend alive. Fragments of artifacts from the Visigothic period have been found in southern Italy, though none clearly connected to the loot of Rome. Local legends persist around Cosenza, handed down in whispers and folk tales about buried gold and a river that once ran dry. Some believe that Roman Catholic relics looted from churches during the sack may have been among the treasures lost with Alaric. Others go further, linking the tale to the fabled menorah and sacred objects taken from the Second Temple in Jerusalem, which were themselves carried to Rome by the legions of Titus. If these relics were in Rome in 410, and if Alaric took them, could they still lie beneath the Bucento? The mystery deepens when one considers the motivations behind such a burial. Alaric was not merely a conqueror, he was a Christian, a leader caught between cultures, Roman and Gothic, pagan and Christian, soldier and king. His burial, as described, echoes ancient traditions of sacred kingship. Perhaps it was not only about hiding wealth, but honoring legacy. A tomb not just of treasure, but of identity. Even today, the river flows quietly through Cosenza, its surface undisturbed, its depths unknowable. Beneath it, maybe nothing lies at all, or maybe, preserved under layers of sediment and secrecy, rests a forgotten moment in history, a tomb of gold sealed by silence. So we ask, was the treasure of Alaric real? Or was it a story crafted to immortalize a warrior king in death, as he had defied an empire in life? In the golden light of North Africa's fading dusk, the ruins of ancient Mauritania rest in silence. The stones of forgotten cities, weathered, broken, half-buried, stand as the only witnesses to a life that once bridged two worlds. Here, amid the quiet echoes of empire, lingers the shadow of a queen, Cleopatra Selene, daughter of the most famous lovers in history, Cleopatra VII of Egypt and Mark Antony of Rome. But unlike her mother, whose end is forever sealed in legend, Cleopatra Selene simply disappears. Born in 40 BC during the turbulent final years of the Roman Republic, Cleopatra Selene was a child of drama and destiny. Her parents, allies of the East and enemies of Octavian, soon to be Augustus, were defeated at the Battle of Actium. Her mother's suicide, followed by her father's death, left Cleopatra Selene an orphan before she reached adolescence. Captured by the victorious Romans, she was paraded through the streets of Rome in chains during Octavian's triumph, a political symbol of Egypt's fall. Yet she was not executed. Instead, Octavian spared her, placing her in the household of his sister, Octavia, the very woman her father had once betrayed. Raised in the heart of imperial Rome, Cleopatra Selene received a Roman education while remaining a living emblem of a vanished dynasty. Her fate could have been erasure, but instead, she re-emerged as a queen. In a strategic marriage orchestrated by Augustus himself, Cleopatra Selene was wed to Juba II, a North African prince turned Roman scholar. Together they were sent to rule Mauritania, an important but semi-autonomous client kingdom on the empire's western frontier. From their capital at Caesarea, modern-day Churchill in Algeria, they governed a land where Roman, Berber, Greek, and Egyptian traditions met and mingled. For a time, Cleopatra Selene flourished. She became queen of a new realm, bringing with her a keen intellect, political grace, and a cultural memory that stretched back to the Ptolemies. Coins bearing her image show a regal, composed face with Greek and Latin inscriptions, proof that she was not a mere consort, but a ruler in her own right. Together with Juba, she sponsored art, architecture, and scholarship. Mauritania grew wealthy, its cities adorned with temples, mosaics, and monuments that bore the fingerprints of multiple civilizations. And then, silence. Cleopatra Selene vanishes from the historical record. There is no surviving account of her death, no known tomb, no preserved writings. After a certain point in Juba Theku's reign, her name disappears from inscriptions and dedications. Scholars believe she died around 5 BC, but this is conjecture, based not on documents, but on absence. What happened to her? Was her death natural, perhaps in childbirth, as some suspect? A queen dying in her 30s would not have been uncommon, yet for someone of her stature, linked by blood to both the Ptolemies and the Julio-Claudians, such a passing would likely have merited a memorial. Yet none has been found. Others suggest that political tensions may have played a role. As Augustus aged and consolidated power, ties to the legacy of Mark Antony and Cleopatra VII may have become more dangerous than useful. Was her memory intentionally erased? Were records of her reign suppressed, her tomb hidden or destroyed? And then there's the Mausoleum of Mauritania, a vast circular structure standing just outside modern Tipaza, near the Algerian coast. Local legend calls it the Tomb of the Christian Woman, but archaeologists believe it may be the resting place of Cleopatra Selene and Juba II. The monument, once crowned with a pyramid, is massive and mysterious, its precise function and occupants never conclusively determined. Looted in antiquity, its chambers are now empty. No inscriptions survive to confirm the identities of those buried there. Could this be her tomb? If so, why is her name absent? Some point to symbolic reasons. Cleopatra Selene, straddling Roman, Greek, Egyptian, and Berber identities, may have been buried under deliberately neutral terms, reflecting a life lived at the crossroads of worlds. Others speculate that the structure may not be her tomb at all, that her final resting place remains undiscovered, somewhere beneath the soil of Mauritania or the sands of Egypt. There are even more speculative ideas, that she returned in secret to Alexandria, that her death was staged, that her lineage continued in obscurity, shaping the region long after history ceased to take notice. What remains clear is this: Cleopatra Selene was more than a footnote to her parents' downfall. She was a sovereign, a survivor, and a symbol. A child of two great civilizations, entrusted with the task of forging something new from the ruins of empire. And yet, in the end, she disappeared, leaving behind coins, architecture, and silence. How does a queen vanish? Was her memory erased intentionally? Was her legacy lost in the shuffle of shifting politics? Or is her story still hidden in ruins we've yet to fully excavate, in scrolls not yet uncovered, in tombs not yet opened? The ancient stones of Mauritania have not yet spoken, and until they do, Cleopatra Selene remains a mystery, a queen without a grave, a story without an ending. The Tower of London rises with quiet defiance on the north bank of the Thames, its white stone walls weathered by time, its turrets casting long shadows across centuries of blood and intrigue. Within these walls, royalty lived and ruled, but also vanished. Among its many stories, one lingers more than most, a tale of innocence, ambition, betrayal, and silence. The mysterious death of King Edward V. The year was 1483. England was weary, its crown passed too often through violence and war. The boy king, Edward V, only 12 years old, had just inherited the throne after the sudden death of his father, Edward IV. He was young but not unprepared. Raised in courtly tradition, schooled in diplomacy, and supported by his mother's powerful family, Edward was meant to be a symbol of peace in a fractured realm. But fate and power had other plans. As Edward made his way to London for his coronation, his uncle Richard, Duke of Gloucester, intercepted him. Citing concerns about the influence of the Queen's relatives, Richard took the boy into his custody. Initially lodged in the bishop's palace, Edward was soon transferred to the Tower of London, a customary residence for monarchs awaiting coronation. His younger brother, Richard, Duke of York, joined him shortly thereafter. And then, they were never seen in public again. At first, their presence was noted. Servants reported seeing them playing in the gardens, laughing, speaking softly through the windows. But then the sightings stopped. The public waited for word. It never came. Within weeks, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, was crowned King Richard III. The official story was vague. The princes had been declared illegitimate, born of a marriage claimed to be invalid. Parliament passed the Titulus Regius, placing Richard on the throne. But what became of the two young boys? No announcement was made. No funeral was held. No bodies were recovered. Rumors spread quickly. Whispers of murder, of suffocation in the night, of men creeping into the tower under cover of darkness. The names of suspects floated through court circles. Sir James Tyrrell, a loyal retainer to Richard III, is often cited. Some claimed he confessed under torture years later to carrying out the murders on Richard's orders, but the confession was destroyed. No physical evidence was ever produced. Was Richard III truly responsible? Many believe so. The motive was clear. The boys, alive, posed a threat to his rule. Their bloodline, however questioned, carried powerful loyalties. Eliminating them would secure the throne. But others dispute this narrative. Richard's defenders argue that he had no need to kill the boys, that their disappearance served others more than him. Henry Tudor, who would become Henry VII, had more to gain. By the time he claimed the crown at Bosworth in 1485, the princes were already gone. Could he or his allies have had a hand in their fate? Did they remove a future threat to their legitimacy and place the blame on a defeated king? And then there is the possibility that the boys never died at all. Over the years, pretenders surfaced. Men claiming to be Richard, the younger prince, having somehow escaped the tower. The most famous, Perkin Warbeck, was even recognized by several European monarchs as the true heir. Though eventually captured and executed, his case reignited the mystery. Could one or both of the princes have been smuggled out in secret? Centuries later, in 1674, two small skeletons were discovered beneath a staircase in the tower. Buried in a chest, they were believed to be the remains of children, prompting many to assume they had finally found the missing princes. The bones were later interred in Westminster Abbey under the order of King Charles II, but no autopsy or modern analysis was conducted at the time. In the 20th century, a limited examination was performed. The results were inconclusive. The skeletons were incomplete. The ages and sexes of the children could not be definitively confirmed. Requests to subject the remains to DNA testing have been denied by the Church of England. The tomb remains closed. So what became of Edward V? Was he murdered by his uncle, as most Tudor historians claim? Or did he die at the hands of those who came after? Was he hidden away in exile, his identity lost to time? Or did he perish quietly within the tower, his fate known only to a few, his voice silenced by the political machine that had once crowned him? The Tower of London remains a fortress of secrets. Tourists walk its halls today, peering into the rooms where kings once lived and died. But no one knows for certain what happened to the two princes. Their portraits hang in galleries, their names etched in history, but their story ends in shadows. A boy king, barely crowned, a brother, even younger, a throne stolen or saved, a silence that has lasted more than 500 years. And so we ask, what truly happened behind those cold stone walls? The great city of Nineveh once stood as the beating heart of the Assyrian Empire, its towering walls and sprawling palaces symbols of unmatched power and ruthless ambition. Along the banks of the Tigris River, beneath the rising heat of the Mesopotamian sun, stone lions guarded temple gates, and inscriptions carved into alabaster whispered tales of conquest, fear, and divine favor. And at the center of it all stood Sennacherib, king of kings, builder of empires, and a man whose end would remain cloaked in silence and suspicion. Sennacherib reigned from 705 to 681 BC, during one of the most powerful periods of the Assyrian Empire. His name alone evoked dread across the ancient Near East. He waged brutal campaigns in Babylonia, Syria, and Judah, leaving behind not only a trail of destruction, but also an architectural legacy of astonishing scale. He transformed Nineveh into a wonder of the ancient world, its walls stretching for miles, its gardens said by some to rival even those of Babylon. But despite his accomplishments, Sennacherib's death is one of the most enigmatic in the history of ancient Mesopotamia. The biblical account, written in the book of 2 Kings, states that after his failed siege of Jerusalem, Sennacherib returned to Nineveh, where he was later assassinated by his own sons while worshiping in the temple of his god. It is a striking claim, charged with theological meaning, but frustratingly sparse in detail. Why would the most powerful man in the Near East be murdered by his own blood? And what led to such a dramatic end? Assyrian records confirm that Sennacherib died in 681 BC and was succeeded by his son Esarhaddon. But they are conspicuously vague about the circumstances of the king's death. The official annals do not describe the event. They do not name the assassins. They do not even mention violence. Silence in ancient royal inscriptions can speak volumes, and here it hints at a scandal too deep or too dangerous to record. But from fragments of Babylonian and later Greek texts, a more complex story begins to emerge. It appears that two of Sennacherib's sons, Arda-Mulissu and Nabu-shar-Usur, may have conspired together to assassinate their father in a bid to seize the throne. Arda-Mulissu had previously been named crown prince, but was later passed over in favor of a younger brother, Esarhaddon. The demotion sparked deep resentment and perhaps a hunger for revenge. On a day of religious ceremony, possibly during a ritual inside the temple of the god Nisroch, Sennacherib was cut down, allegedly by his own heirs. If this account is true, it would have been a political earthquake. Regicide, especially in a temple, would have been not only a crime, but a sacrilege. And yet, this stunning event left so few reliable records behind. Why? One possibility is deliberate erasure. When Esarhaddon rose to power, He would have had every reason to suppress details that might question his legitimacy or tarnish the divine authority of the Assyrian monarchy. By portraying the death as unworthy of comment, or by eliminating contradictory records, he could have controlled the narrative. What was left behind was a void, but the motive may not have been only personal. Sennacherib had made powerful enemies. He had razed Babylon, a city sacred to many in Mesopotamia, after a prolonged period of unrest. In 689 BC, he famously destroyed its temples and flooded its ruins with water from the Euphrates. This act shocked the ancient world. To destroy Babylon was to challenge not only political tradition, but divine order. Many believed that no king could do so without invoking the wrath of the gods. Could Sennacherib's violent death have been seen as divine punishment? Later traditions, including those found in Jewish and Christian sources, interpreted his assassination as retribution for his pride, especially after his failed attempt to conquer Jerusalem. In the biblical narrative, an angel of the Lord is said to have struck down 185,000 Assyrian troops in a single night, forcing Sennacherib to retreat in humiliation. While this figure is likely symbolic, the association between his defeat and his assassination has persisted through the centuries. And yet, there are other stranger theories. Some fringe interpretations suggest that Sennacherib's death was not merely a political coup, but the result of deeper spiritual forces, that his violation of sacred cities like Babylon and his perceived arrogance in defying divine law set in motion a supernatural reckoning. Others speculate that the religious elites of Assyria may have conspired with his sons, choosing a dramatic and sacrificial death as a form of expiation for his sins. But without direct evidence, no eyewitness accounts, no surviving trial, no confirmed burial site, the truth remains just out of reach. All we know is that a king who once claimed dominion over the world died in a moment of chaos and secrecy, betrayed, perhaps by those closest to him, at the height of his power. The palace walls of Nineveh have crumbled. The records are broken, scattered, lost beneath the sands. And yet the question lingers. What truly happened in the final moments of Sennacherib's life? At the edge of the ancient Mediterranean world, where the blue waters lapped against marble quays and the scent of incense drifted through colonnaded streets, stood a city that dreamed of knowing everything. Alexandria, founded by Alexander the Great, ruled by the Ptolemies and shaped by poets, mathematicians, and philosophers, it was once the beating heart of human knowledge. And at its center stood a beacon, not only of light but of learning. The Library of Alexandria. It was no ordinary collection of scrolls. It was a vision, a place where every text, every fragment, every story and scientific insight from across the known world would be gathered, studied, copied, and preserved. Built in the 3rd century BC under the reign of Ptolemy I, or his successor, the library was part of the larger Mausion, a temple of the Muses where scholars lived, debated, and pursued truth without end. But what did it truly contain? That question has haunted historians for centuries, because while the grandeur of the library is legend, its catalog is lost. Estimates vary wildly. Some ancient sources claim it housed 400,000 scrolls. Others say as many as 700,000. But these numbers may not mean individual titles. Scrolls were fragile, limited in length, often segmented. A single large work might be spread over many volumes. Still, the scale was immense. The library sought everything: literature from Greece, Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, Persia, even records from lands whose names have faded with time. Works by Homer, Plato, and Aristotle certainly resided there. But so too may have writings that no longer exist in any form. The lost tragedies of Euripides. The entire works of Democritus, whose atomic theories prefigured modern physics. Medical treatises from the schools of Hippocrates and Galen, astronomical models from Babylon, mathematical insights that would not resurface for 1,000 years. It is said that ships docking at Alexandria's port were searched, and any scrolls aboard were seized, copied, and placed in the library's vaults. The originals were often kept, while the copies returned to the owners. Knowledge was treated as a treasure of empire, a resource to be claimed, preserved, and guarded. But if the library was a vessel for the world's wisdom, where is that wisdom now? No definitive list of its holdings survives. No detailed inventory, just scattered fragments, indirect references, and tantalizing quotes in later texts. The content of the Library of Alexandria is, in many ways, the greatest lost book in history. So what happened? There is no single answer. The library did not vanish in a single night of fire, as romanticized legends might suggest. Instead, its decline appears to have unfolded gradually, across centuries of neglect, war, and shifting political tides. Some point to Julius Caesar's siege of Alexandria in 48 BC. During the conflict, part of the city's harbor and adjoining buildings caught fire. Ancient sources like Plutarch mention the destruction of scrolls, though it's unclear whether this refers to the main library, a satellite collection, or storage facilities associated with the palace. Later, under the Christianization of the Roman Empire, intellectual life in Alexandria changed. Pagan institutions were closed, and the famous Serapeum, once home to part of the library's holdings, was destroyed by religious zealots in 391 AD. Some believe this marked the final blow. Others argue that by then, the core of the library had already been lost. Even more mysterious is the role of the Arab conquest in 642 AD. Some later Islamic sources claim that the Caliph Umar ordered the burning of books that contradicted the Quran. But these stories were written centuries after the fact, and are likely apocryphal, perhaps intended to dramatize ideological victories rather than record historical truth. Still, the mystery remains. Not just how the library was lost, but what exactly was lost with it. Did the scrolls include maps of the known and unknown world? Did they preserve forgotten languages and cosmologies? Were there accounts of civilizations now erased from the archaeological record? Did they house technological knowledge, hydraulic engineering, medical procedures, astronomical theories that could have accelerated human understanding by centuries? And perhaps most tantalizing of all, could fragments of this collection still exist? Some believe that a few works once housed in Alexandria survive, copied by travelers, preserved by scribes, scattered in monasteries, or absorbed into later Arabic translations. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, centuries later, echoed Alexandria's ambitions. Could it have inherited more than just its spirit? Others believe that somewhere, beneath the sands of modern Alexandria, sealed chambers or buried caches may still sleep in silence, waiting to be found. The city has yielded ancient streets, mosaics, even submerged structures along its coastline. But no definitive trace of the library's shelves, scrolls, or reading halls has emerged. What, then, did the Library of Alexandria truly contain? Was it a lost encyclopedia of ancient science, a treasury of world literature, a sanctuary for human memory, erased not by flame alone, but by time, empire, and indifference? Or was it always, in part, a myth, its reality surpassed by the idea it came to represent? The truth, perhaps, lies in the gap between memory and myth, between stone and silence. A treasure not of gold, but of ideas. Lost not in one cataclysm, but in the slow forgetting of civilizations. And so we wonder, if the Library of Alexandria were to speak again, what would it tell us? Somewhere along the craggy coastlines of ancient Ionia, where the Aegean Sea crashes against weathered stone and olive trees sway in the wind, words were spoken that would outlive empires. Verses, carried not by paper or ink, but by human voice. Stories of war, wrath, fate, and the will of the gods. The Iliad, a cornerstone of Western literature. A poem that shaped nations, inspired philosophers, and defined an age. But who wrote it? For over 2,000 years, the name Homer has echoed through time as the answer. A blind poet, wandering from town to town, singing of heroes and gods to the music of a lyre. Yet when we search the past for this man, this figure so central to the foundation of literature, we find not clarity, but shadows. There is no contemporary record of Homer's life, no definitive birthplace, no tomb, no confirmed mention of him in surviving documents from the centuries in which he supposedly lived. The earliest biographical details come from much later sources, filled with contradiction and myth. Some said he was from Smyrna, others from Chios. A few even claimed he never existed at all. The Iliad itself offers no clues. It is not signed. It bears no introduction or epilogue. It does not refer to its author, only to the events it describes. A sprawling tale of rage and tragedy at the walls of Troy, where men fought, died, and were remembered in song. So who, or what, was Homer? Some scholars believe that the Iliad and its companion epic, the Odyssey, were not composed by a single author at all. Instead, they suggest that these poems emerged from a long oral tradition, evolving over centuries, passed from bard to bard before being written down. In this view, Homer may have been a name applied to the tradition itself, or to the final redactor who arranged the verses into their now familiar form. This theory is supported by the language of the poem itself. The Iliad is composed in a formulaic style, rich with repeated phrases, epithets, and stock scenes, devices ideal for oral transmission. The poem's structure, meter, and rhythm all suggest it was designed to be performed aloud, memorized, and recited by heart. Could it have been the product not of one mind, but of many, refined and reworked over generations? And if so, when did it first take shape? Some place its origins around the 8th century BC, during the early Greek Archaic period. Others believe the roots go deeper, to the Mycenaean world of the 12th century BC, from which its characters and setting seem to draw. Was the Iliad a memory of a real war, filtered through centuries of song? Or was it pure invention, epic myth given form by artists whose names have long since been lost? There are also more controversial theories. Some have proposed that the Iliad was composed by a woman, a priestess perhaps, from one of the ancient sanctuaries of Anatolia. Others argue that it was the work of an elite scribe at a royal court, drawing on diverse regional traditions to craft a unified narrative. A few go even further, suggesting that Homer was not a person, but a title, bestowed upon any master poet who composed in the epic style. And then there are the fragments, the hints and clues scattered through other ancient texts. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BC, refers to Homer but offers no concrete details about his life. Later authors like Pausanias and Plutarch include stories that seem more hagiographic than historical. A blind man in rags, a wandering bard rejected by kings, a humble soul given divine inspiration. Are these echoes of a real life? Or the invention of later generations trying to give flesh to a ghost? Some modern researchers have turned to stylometric analysis, using computers to measure patterns in word choice and structure. Their findings are suggestive. The Iliad and the Odyssey, while similar, may have been written by different hands. Could one have been the product of Homer and the other an imitator? Or does this further support the theory of multiple authors working within a shared tradition? What we are left with is not a clear portrait, but a mystery at the very heart of literature. The Iliad has endured not because of who wrote it, but because of what it contains. The raw force of human emotion, the weight of honor and loss, the struggle between destiny and will. It speaks to something universal, something timeless, and perhaps, in that sense, it does not need a single author. But still, we wonder. Who first gave voice to Achilles' rage? Who shaped the rhythm of that opening line? Sing, goddess, the anger of Achilles, son of Peleus, a line that would echo through the ages. Who crafted a story so enduring that it would be read, studied, and cherished across millennia? Was it Homer, as tradition claims? A man lost to time, but remembered through verse? Or are we chasing a name that never truly belonged to one person at all? The mystery of the Iliad's authorship endures, not just because of what we don't know, but because of what it reveals. The fragile boundary between memory and myth, between history and art. In a quiet, glass display case at the Neues Museum in Berlin, the face of a queen gazes out across centuries. Painted in delicate tones of ochre and rose, her cheekbones high, her eyes lined with precision, her gaze timeless, calm, confident, serene. This is the famous bust of Nefertiti, one of the most iconic images of ancient Egypt. And yet, for all its perfection, it is only a mask. Her real face, her remains, have never been found. Nefertiti. The name means the beautiful one has come. And come she did, into the heart of one of Egypt's most radical chapters. She was the great royal wife of Pharaoh Akhenaten, who ruled in the mid-14th century BC. Together, they presided over a religious revolution, replacing the traditional pantheon of gods with the singular worship of the Aten, the sun disk. At their new capital, Akhetaten, modern-day Amarna, art shifted, rituals changed, and power was redefined. Nefertiti was no passive consort. She appeared beside her husband in official ceremonies, making offerings, wearing crowns usually reserved for kings. In some depictions, she is shown smiting enemies, a gesture once exclusive to male pharaohs. There are even theories she may have ruled in her own right after Akhenaten's death, perhaps under the name Neferuaten. But then, she disappears. Sometime in the later years of Akhenaten's reign, Nefertiti vanishes from the historical record. No clear inscription records her death. No tomb bears her name. No mummy has been positively identified as hers. For someone so central to Egypt's 18th dynasty, so vividly portrayed in stone and pigment, her physical absence is unsettling. So where is she? Many Egyptologists believe she may be buried in the royal necropolis at Amarna. Tombs were constructed quickly during the city's short lifespan, and several contain damaged or erased inscriptions. Could one of these belong to Nefertiti? Could her burial have been hastily arranged after political tides shifted? Others believe she was interred in the Valley of the Kings after the abandonment of Amarna. This theory gained momentum in recent years when British archaeologist Nicholas Reeves proposed that behind the walls of Tutankhamun's tomb might lie hidden chambers, one of which, he speculated, could contain the tomb of Nefertiti. Radar scans initially seemed to support the presence of voids behind the north and west walls. The idea was electrifying, that King Tut's tomb was only a front, an annex to a larger royal burial, his mother or stepmother lying just beyond, sealed in silence for over 3,000 years. Yet further investigations were inconclusive. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities halted the project. Some scans suggested no chambers existed at all. Others were ambiguous. And so, the hypothesis remains, unproven, unrefuted. Still, the Valley of the Kings holds other tantalizing clues. In 1898, French archaeologist Victor Loret discovered tomb KV-35, the resting place of Amenhotep II. Within it were 3 mummies relocated there in ancient times. One, known as the Younger Lady, was found mutilated, her face damaged, her chest violently opened. DNA testing later revealed that she was the mother of Tutankhamun and a full sister to Akhenaten. Could she be Nefertiti? Most scholars doubt it. There is no definitive inscription linking her to that name. Moreover, the familial relationship complicates things. If she were Akhenaten's sister, she could not also be Nefertiti, who was likely of foreign origin, possibly Syrian, perhaps from Mitanni royalty. But the confusion speaks volumes. Even with modern genetics, the lines of blood and power in ancient Egypt remain entangled and uncertain. Another candidate lies in tomb KV-21, a skeleton referred to as KV-21A. Discovered in a collapsed chamber, she is badly damaged, her identity obscured. But DNA analysis suggests she may be the mother of one of Tutankhamun's stillborn children. If so, she would have had to be his wife, Ankhesenamun, daughter of Nefertiti. Yet some wonder if the attribution is wrong, and if the skeleton could in fact belong to the elusive queen herself. Beyond these remains, there are more speculative theories. Some suggest that Nefertiti assumed the identity of the mysterious pharaoh Smenkhkare, who ruled briefly after Akhenaten's death and before Tutankhamun's rise. The evidence is thin, fragmented inscriptions, ambiguous titles, but intriguing. Could Nefertiti have taken on a male persona to preserve the Atenist legacy? Or was she erased deliberately by those who came after? Pharaohs who sought to restore the old gods and destroy all traces of Akhenaten's heresy? And then, of course, there is the possibility that her tomb remains entirely untouched, lost beneath the sands, beneath a private villa in Amarna, or hidden behind the walls of a royal chamber waiting to be breached. The absence of her remains is more than just an archaeological puzzle. It is a silence at the heart of a dynasty. A woman who once stood at the pinnacle of power, whose beauty and authority shaped an era, vanishes as if by design. No bones, no sarcophagus, no funerary texts to guide her to the afterlife. Why? Was her memory deliberately erased, like so many others during the counter-revolution that followed Akhenaten's death? Or was she honored in secrecy, her tomb hidden to protect it from those who would defile it? Did her remains disintegrate in some forgotten grave? Or do they lie, misidentified, in a museum drawer, labeled with the wrong name? Even today, her bust gazes out across the museum floor, not as a relic, but as a question. A queen without a grave, a life preserved in image, not in body. So we ask again, where is Nefertiti? And if she is ever found, what else might she reveal? Beneath the sun-baked soils of ancient Mesopotamia, in the land between the Tigris and Euphrates, lie the ruins of Uruk, once one of the world's first great cities. Its ziggurats have long since crumbled, its walls reduced to dust. But from this forgotten place emerged a name that has echoed for millennia: Gilgamesh, a name carved into clay, a legend passed down through fragments of cuneiform. A king, or a god, or both. The Epic of Gilgamesh, preserved on a series of broken tablets, is one of humanity's oldest surviving literary works. Composed in Akkadian during the 2nd millennium BC, though based on even older Sumerian tales, it tells the story of a mighty king, part man and part divine, who wrestles with mortality, love, loss, and the search for eternal life. But was Gilgamesh a real person? Or was he only ever a symbol, an archetype molded by poets, priests, and storytellers? The Sumerian king list, an ancient record inscribed on tablets over 4,000 years ago, offers our first tantalizing clue. Among its catalog of rulers is the entry, Gilgamesh, whose father was a Lillu, a spirit, ruled Uruk for 126 years. An extraordinary lifespan, yet not uncommon in this semi-mythical chronology. Before Gilgamesh are kings said to have ruled for hundreds or even thousands of years, but his name stands out. He is one of the few kings on the list also known from myth, one of the few who blurs the line between legend and record. Archaeologists have unearthed inscriptions from Uruk and nearby cities that mention a king named Gilgamesh. His name appears on votive objects, seals, and in temple dedications. But these references are brief, cryptic, and lack context. No tomb has ever been found, no statue bearing his likeness, only fragments, hints of a presence once revered, later deified. The epic itself paints a vivid portrait. Gilgamesh is a tyrant at first, powerful, restless, and feared by his people. The gods send him a companion, Enkidu, to humble him. Their friendship becomes the heart of the tale as they battle monsters, defy divinities, and confront the inevitability of death. When Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh is consumed by grief and sets off on a journey to find the secret of immortality. What he learns, ultimately, is that death is inescapable, and that only the memory of our deeds endures. But where did this story come from? And who created the character of Gilgamesh? Was he based on a real king of Uruk, whose exploits were gradually exaggerated into myth? A warrior king remembered in oral tradition? Or was he entirely fictional, an invention of temple scribes who sought to embody ideals of kingship and the human struggle against fate? Some scholars suggest that Gilgamesh may have ruled around 2700 BC, during the early dynastic period. If so, he would have lived nearly 1,000 years before the standard Babylonian version of the epic was composed. That version, attributed to a scribe named Sinleki Unini, reflects centuries of layered storytelling, versions passed from Sumerian to Akkadian to Assyrian cultures. The character of Gilgamesh also changed over time. In earlier Sumerian poems, he is more trickster than hero, a clever and unpredictable force. Later, he becomes tragic, introspective, noble. This evolution suggests a figure not frozen in fact, but shaped and reshaped by the cultures that inherited his story. Even his supposed divinity is ambiguous. In the epic, Gilgamesh is said to be 2/3 divine and 1/3 mortal. But what does that mean in the context of ancient belief? Was it a metaphor for his greatness? A way of signaling divine favor? Or did his people literally believe he was born of gods? Modern excavations at Uruk have uncovered vast temple complexes, intricate irrigation systems, and signs of a highly organized society. It is entirely plausible that such a city had rulers powerful enough to inspire legends. But the archaeological record offers no direct evidence of Gilgamesh's rule. No clear tomb, no inscriptions with detailed exploits, no artifacts that bear his name alongside titles and dates. Some have speculated that his tomb may still lie hidden beneath the Euphrates River, which has shifted course over the millennia. Satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar have revealed promising sites near ancient Uruk, including what may be the outlines of an enormous burial structure. But excavations have been limited, and no definitive discovery has been made. And then there is the influence of Gilgamesh beyond Mesopotamia. Parallels have been drawn between the epic and later texts, including the Hebrew Bible. The flood story in the epic, in which Utnapishtim survives a great deluge by building a boat, closely resembles the story of Noah. Themes of divine wrath, mortal pride, and the search for meaning recur across cultures. Could Gilgamesh have been a shared ancestor of myths that spread far and wide? Or was he, as some have proposed, a composite, an amalgamation of several kings, heroes, and archetypes, a creation of literature, not history. The truth may never be fully known. Gilgamesh lives now in the space between stone and story, too real to dismiss, too mythical to confirm. His voice still speaks from the cracked tablets stored in museum vaults, from lines etched in clay and memory. He asks the same questions we ask today. What is the meaning of life? Can we defeat death? What remains of us after we are gone? And so we return to the question, who was Gilgamesh? A forgotten king whose memory was exalted in verse, a divine hero whose tale was meant to teach and endure, or a name without a man, carried through time by those who needed his story more than his facts. As the Crusades raged across the Holy Land and empires clashed under banners of faith and conquest, whispers began to circulate through medieval Europe of a distant Christian kingdom hidden beyond deserts and mountains, ruled by a mighty priest king, a man of wisdom and wealth, whose lands were filled with marvels, whose armies would one day ride to aid Christendom in its darkest hour. His name was Prester John. For centuries, maps marked his realm in the corners of the world, first in the east, somewhere in India or Central Asia, then, when hope shifted, in the heart of Africa, always just beyond reach, just beyond proof, a phantom kingdom drawn in ink and desire. But who was Prester John? And did he ever exist? The legend first surfaced in the 12th century, amid the turmoil of the Second Crusade. In 1145, a letter reached the court of the Byzantine emperor and later made its way to Pope Eugene III. It was addressed from Presbyter Johannes, a Christian ruler of immense power and piety. In the letter, Prester John described a kingdom rich in gold and precious stones, filled with unicorns and griffins, where rivers ran with jewels and justice reigned without flaw. He claimed lineage from the three magi. He promised allegiance to Rome and hinted that he would one day march to liberate Jerusalem from Muslim control. The letter was almost certainly a forgery, but it spread like wildfire, copied, translated, and believed. In a Europe fractured by warfare and doubt, the idea of a hidden Christian ally beyond the Muslim world was irresistible. Kings, popes, and merchants all clung to the hope that Prester John was real. At first, they looked east. India, long imagined as a land of wonders, seemed the most likely location. Some believed that the kingdom of Prester John lay beyond the Islamic world, tucked away amid the riches of Cathay. The tales aligned neatly with ancient stories from Herodotus and Pliny, blending medieval longing with classical fantasy. When the Mongols appeared in the 13th century, many believed their sudden power might be linked to Prester John. Early reports mistook Genghis Khan, or one of his rivals, for the mysterious king. For a time, Europeans believed the Mongol hordes were Christian armies, sweeping down from Prester John's domain to aid in the holy struggle. Reality soon corrected that illusion. Later, the focus shifted south. By the 14th century, attention turned toward Ethiopia, where an ancient Christian kingdom had long existed, isolated but enduring. European explorers and missionaries began to speculate that this land, largely unknown to them, could be the realm of Prester John. When Portuguese sailors reached the Horn of Africa in the 15th century, they were convinced they had found traces of the priest king's legacy. Letters were sent, alliances proposed. But the reality of the Ethiopian Empire, with its own rich history and traditions, did not match the extravagant promises of the myth. Still, the legend persisted. Maps from the late medieval period often placed Prester John's kingdom in Africa, usually beyond Nubia or near the sources of the Nile. His realm was drawn as a utopia, untouched by sin, ruled by faith, and filled with miraculous beasts. Even into the age of exploration, adventurers searched for the lost kingdom, hoping to find Prester John and unite Christendom in a global alliance against Islam. But the more they searched, the more elusive he became. Modern historians believe the legend was likely born from a mixture of fact and fantasy. It may have been inspired by real Christian communities in the East, Nestorian churches in Persia, Armenia, and even China. Reports of these isolated groups, embellished over time, may have evolved into the image of a powerful Christian monarch. Others suggest the story was deliberately fabricated, either as propaganda to boost morale during the Crusades or as an attempt to manipulate foreign diplomacy. There are also those who see Prester John as a psychological mirror, an expression of medieval Europe's longing for certainty and salvation. At a time when the known world was surrounded by mystery, the idea of a righteous ally in the unexplored reaches offered hope. It provided a counterbalance to the chaos and fragmentation of the era. A fantasy, perhaps, but one shaped by very real fears and desires. What's most remarkable is not just that the story endured, but how it adapted. Each time it was disproven, it reemerged in a new place, reshaped to fit the expanding map. When Central Asia no longer seemed plausible, the tale moved to India. When India was known, it shifted to Ethiopia. The myth of Prester John traveled with the boundaries of ignorance, always living in the blank spaces of the map. And yet, some fragments still puzzle. Coins found in Central Asia bearing crosses, inscribed stones in remote regions hinting at Christian practices, reports, though often unreliable, of priests and kings claiming descent from ancient lines. Could there have been a kernel of truth? A forgotten Christian enclave? A local ruler whose legend grew far beyond his borders? Or was Prester John always a legend, crafted in scriptoria, whispered by travelers, and mapped by men who never left their shores? Today, the name survives mostly in footnotes and folklore. But the questions remain. Who wrote the letter that sparked centuries of search? What stories inspired it? And why did it capture the imagination of a continent for so long? Was Prester John ever real? Or was he, like so many mysteries of the past, not meant to be found, but simply believed? Along the windswept coast of modern-day Turkey, not far from the Dardanelles Strait, a mound rises quietly above the plain. From a distance, it looks unremarkable, a natural hill covered in scrub and low grasses. But beneath its layers lies the city of Troy. Or perhaps many Troys, built, destroyed, and rebuilt across centuries. And at its heart, a mystery that has captivated the world for more than 3,000 years. Did the Trojan War really happen? We know the story. A Greek fleet crosses the sea to lay siege to the mighty city of Troy. A 10-year conflict follows, marked by duels, divine interventions, and tragic deaths. At its center, the rage of Achilles and the fate of Helen, whose beauty was said to have launched 1,000 ships. It is a tale etched into Western memory, immortalized in Homer's Iliad. But how much of it is history, and how much is myth? For centuries, scholars debated whether Troy ever existed at all. The Iliad, after all, was a poetic epic, filled with gods and monsters, composed centuries after the supposed events. It wasn't until the 19th century that real evidence began to emerge. In 1870, the self-taught archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann began excavating a site near the village of Hisarlik. Driven by his obsession with Homer's text, Schliemann claimed he had found Troy. And indeed, his digging uncovered the remains of a powerful ancient city, its massive walls, gates, and towers confirming that a once formidable fortress had stood here, overlooking the strategic passage between the Aegean and Black Seas. But what Schliemann uncovered was more complicated than he imagined. Beneath the surface were not the remains of a single city, but many. At least 9 distinct layers of habitation, spanning from the early Bronze Age to the Roman period. Which of these, if any, was the Troy of Homer? Troy 6 and Troy 7. A, dating from around 1700 to 1200 BC, are the strongest candidates. Troy 6 was a grand city with impressive stone walls and well-planned streets, but it appears to have been destroyed, possibly by an earthquake. Troy the 7, which followed shortly after, shows signs of fire, sudden destruction, and hastily buried bodies. Could this be evidence of a violent siege? Possibly. But there is no definitive link to Greeks, or to a 10-year war, or to the cast of characters that populate the Iliad. No inscriptions name Priam or Hector, no spear engraved with Achilles' name. The archaeology speaks softly, offering fragments rather than answers. Some historians believe the Iliad preserves a distant memory of a real conflict, one that may have occurred around 1250 BC, during a period of widespread upheaval in the eastern Mediterranean. This era saw the collapse of several major powers, the Hittites, the Mycenaeans, and others. Trade networks disintegrated, cities burned. Was Troy part of that larger wave of destruction? Perhaps the Greeks, known then as Achaeans, did indeed launch a war against a rival power in Anatolia. But if so, it was likely over trade routes or political rivalry, not a stolen queen. The Helen of Homer may be pure invention, a poetic device to explain deeper, more mundane causes of war. And then there's the question of Homer himself. The Iliad was composed around the 8th century BC, some 400 to 500 years after the supposed Trojan War. Was Homer drawing on ancient oral traditions? Or was he creating something entirely new, blending fragments of memory with imaginative invention? We have no earlier written versions of the story. The earliest surviving texts of the Iliad date from much later, copied and recopied over centuries. Even within the poem, time bends. Bronze Age warriors are described using iron weapons. Chariots are used in ways inconsistent with their historical deployment. The world of the Iliad is a patchwork, some elements accurate to the late Bronze Age, others reflecting Homer's own time, others timeless. Then there's the matter of the famous wooden horse. Homer doesn't describe it in the Iliad. Its story comes later, in Virgil's Aeneid and other sources. Could it have been a metaphor? Some suggest it might have referred to a siege engine, misunderstood over time. Others propose it was a ship or a symbol for earthquake activity, as horses were associated with Poseidon, the god of quakes. Or was it perhaps a clever story designed to capture the imagination, part truth, part symbol, part illusion? In truth, there may have been many Troys and many wars. The city of Hisarlik was destroyed and rebuilt over and over. It was a crossroads of cultures, Hittite, Luwian, Mycenaean, and others. Perhaps the Homeric Troy is not a single historical city, but a composite, an echo of conflicts remembered, retold, and reshaped across generations. Today, the ruins still stand. Tourists walk along the reconstructed walls, stare out toward the sea, and imagine the ships that may once have gathered there. The stones are real. The scars are ancient. But the story they tell remains incomplete. Did the Trojan War happen? Or is it a mirror, reflecting our own need for heroes, glory, and tragic endings? Somewhere between archaeology and poetry, between memory and myth, the truth waits. Buried not just beneath the soil, but within the spaces where history fades and imagination begins. In the cool, dim interiors of ancient libraries, beneath layers of dust, in the margins of forgotten scrolls, amid the scattered remnants of early Christianity, scholars have searched for a voice that may once shape the world. A gospel not preserved in parchment, but reconstructed through silence. A source never seen, yet deeply felt. They call it Q. The Gospel of Q, from the German Quell, meaning source, is one of the most enigmatic concepts in biblical scholarship. No physical copy has ever been found. No church father ever referenced it. No archaeological site has produced a scroll, codex, or fragment bearing its name. And yet, many believe it once existed. The mystery begins with the New Testament itself. The Gospels of Matthew and Luke share striking similarities, not only in theme, but in entire passages. Word for word, line by line, both contain teachings of Jesus that do not appear in the Gospel of Mark, the earliest of the canonical texts. Sayings, parables, beatitudes, and warnings, remarkably consistent, yet independently preserved. How can this be? In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, scholars began to suggest a solution. Matthew and Luke, they argued, must have drawn from two primary sources, the Gospel of Mark and something else, something now lost. A hypothetical document filled with Jesus' sayings. No miracles, no crucifixion narrative, just his words. This hypothetical source came to be known as Q. What might Q have looked like? Based on reconstructions from Matthew and Luke, Q likely contained many of Jesus' most well-known teachings: the Sermon on the Mount, the Lord's Prayer, the parable of the lost sheep, the Golden Rule. But it lacked a birth story, a passion narrative, and the dramatic storytelling that frames the canonical Gospels. In essence, Q may have been a sayings gospel, a collection of wisdom, parables, and aphorisms, passed down orally or written in the earliest years after Jesus' death. Such a format isn't unusual. In the ancient world, many spiritual teachers had their teachings collected and preserved as sayings, stripped of narrative, focused on voice. The Analects of Confucius, the fragments of Heraclitus. Could Q have been something similar? Some scholars point to the Gospel of Thomas, discovered in the mid-20th century among the Nag Hammadi texts in Egypt, as a possible parallel. Thomas is also a sayings gospel, filled with teachings attributed to Jesus, but without a narrative frame. Could it be a cousin of Q, or even a window into the type of document Q once was? But why was Q lost, if it ever existed at all? This is where the mystery deepens. If Q was used by both Matthew and Luke, and if it was so central to preserving Jesus' teachings, why didn't early Christians mention it? Why did no copy survive, no excerpt endure, no reference appear in the writings of the early church? One explanation is historical happenstance. Many texts from antiquity have been lost, perished in fires, destroyed in wars, abandoned as theological preferences evolved. If Q was never widely copied and was quickly absorbed into larger, more comprehensive gospels, it might have been discarded or forgotten. Perhaps it was viewed as redundant once Matthew and Luke became canonical. Another theory is more theological. Q may have been excluded from preservation by design. Its lack of resurrection narrative, its silence on Jesus' divinity and death, may have made it suspect to early Christian leaders seeking to solidify doctrine. As orthodoxy crystallized, alternative or incomplete texts were often sidelined, suppressed, or labeled heretical. Then there's a third possibility, that Q never existed at all. Some scholars now challenge the Q hypothesis, arguing that Luke may have drawn directly from Matthew, or vice versa, rather than from a shared, lost source. This theory, known as the Farrer hypothesis, eliminates the need for Q altogether. Could the similarities between Matthew and Luke be explained by a literary relationship rather than a missing gospel? If so, Q becomes not a lost document, but a scholarly illusion, an echo of patterns mistaken for substance. Still, the idea of Q persists, less as a text perhaps, and more as a possibility. A window into a moment when Jesus was remembered not as a figure in a story, but as a voice. Before theology took shape, before doctrine took root, There may have been a time when what mattered most was what he said, not what happened to him. If Q did exist, it may be one of the earliest records of Jesus' teachings, closer to the historical figure than the richly theological narratives of the later Gospels. In that sense, it would be invaluable, a glimpse into the first efforts to preserve memory, meaning, and truth. Some have speculated that Q might still be hidden, buried in a cave, mislabeled in a monastery, or waiting in a private collection, unknown to scholars. Could a forgotten scrap of papyrus still lie folded within some lost scroll? Could a passing reference in an overlooked letter hint at a once revered source? Or was Q never more than an echo, a clever, scholarly reconstruction of something that never had a name? The mystery remains unresolved. The voice of Q, if it ever spoke, has long since faded. But in the silence, the question lingers. Was there once a gospel without miracles, without stories, just words? And if so, what might those words still reveal? High above the shores of the Black Sea, nestled into the jagged cliffs and hidden by the thick forests of northeastern Anatolia, the remnants of Trebizond cling to stone and memory. It was here, in the shadows of mountains that once marked the edge of empires, that the final echo of Byzantium endured, a last flicker of Roman heritage, far from the palaces of Constantinople. And somewhere within that long twilight, a name surfaces, unexpected, enigmatic, and unresolved. The Romanovs of Trebizond. To most, the name Romanov conjures images of the Russian imperial family, of palaces, revolution, and tragic endings in Yekaterinburg. But long before the dynasty rose in Moscow, another lineage bearing a similar name may have walked the stone corridors of Trebizond and then vanished into the mists of history. Is there a connection? Or is the similarity of names merely a trick of time? The Empire of Trebizond was born from exile. In 1204, as Crusaders sacked Constantinople during the Fourth Crusade, a branch of the Byzantine imperial Komnenos family fled east, establishing a new capital on the rugged coast of the Black Sea. For over 250 years, they ruled a fragile, culturally rich realm, isolated yet resilient. They maintained the rituals of Rome, the splendor of Byzantium, and a claim, however distant, to imperial legitimacy. As Constantinople fell again in 1453, this time to the Ottomans under Mehmed II, Trebizond stood as the last sovereign Byzantine successor, but only briefly. In 1461, just 8 years later, Mehmed turned his gaze east. The city fell after a short siege. The final emperor of Trebizond, David Komnenos, was taken captive and, with his sons, executed in 1463 on charges of conspiracy, or so the story goes. But from here the trail fragments. Rumors persist of children who escaped, of daughters married into foreign courts, of surviving lines hidden in mountains or absorbed into distant aristocracies. And among these, occasional references emerge, scattered across letters, chronicles, and oral histories, to a name that should not have existed, Romanov. Is it a misreading of Romanos, a common Byzantine name? Or does it signify something else, a blending of traditions, a claim to something deeper? Some believe that a surviving branch of the Komnenos line adopted the name Romanov in reference to their heritage. Romans, the term Byzantines used to describe themselves, even long after the fall of Rome itself. If true, the name would have symbolized not just a family, but a legacy. The last flicker of an unbroken line from the Caesars to the mountains of Trebizond. In the 16th and 17th centuries, as the Russian Tsardom began to claim succession from the Byzantine Empire through marriage and symbolism, the Romanov dynasty emerged, officially rising to power in 1613. The connection is tenuous, if not purely symbolic. but some theorists have speculated whether the Russian Romanovs might have traced or even fabricated a connection to Trebizond to strengthen their own imperial claims. Could a forgotten noble descended from the Komnenoi have found refuge in Muscovy? There is, however, no direct evidence, no definitive genealogical link, just overlapping names, shared symbolism, and deep political incentive. The mystery is not only genealogical, but geographic. Some stories suggest that members of the Trebizond imperial family escaped into the Pontic Mountains, protected by loyal clans and monastic communities. In remote monasteries, such as Sumela, perched impossibly on the cliffside, inscriptions and icons survive that depict emperors and saints, blurred now by time. Could one of these figures represent a hidden heir? A prince or princess never captured, never executed? Others fled further, westward into Europe, eastward into Persia. Records from Georgian and Armenian sources mention Byzantine nobles arriving in exile, often with uncertain names and titles. Could the Romanovs of Trebizond have become someone else, hidden under new names, married into minor courts or merchant families? In the 19th and early 20th centuries, as European fascination with dynasties and lost royalty grew, the idea of a surviving Byzantine bloodline began to take on a romantic life of its own. Scholars and adventurers speculated. Claims were made. But again, no concrete proof surfaced. The Ottoman archives are sparse and often opaque. The Byzantine records end abruptly, and the monastic libraries that might contain answers remain only partially explored, many of their texts still untranslated or lost. There are even more speculative theories. Some believe that the Romanovs of Trebizond were never literal descendants, but part of a constructed identity, perhaps a family or faction within Trebizond that claimed Roman heritage to gain status. In a time when lineage meant power, invoking the Roman name could have been a political move rather than a familial truth. Others propose that the name Romanov may have appeared only later, an anachronism projected backward by chroniclers trying to make sense of incomplete records. In this view, the disappearance of the Romanovs of Trebizond may be less a mystery of people than a mystery of interpretation. Yet the silence is powerful. There are no graves, no royal seals, no definitive correspondence, just tantalizing fragments. A coin here, an inscription there, and names whispered in chronicles without context. Still, the question persists. What became of the last remnants of Trebizond? Were they truly extinguished on the orders of Mehmed II? Or did they fade quietly into the landscapes of Anatolia, the Caucasus, or beyond, living under borrowed names, passing down stories in secret? And if the Romanovs of Trebizond were real, by name, by blood, or by claim, what else might they have carried with them? A map, a manuscript, a lineage that connects the ancient world to the modern in ways we have yet to understand. The hills around Trebizond remain silent. The sea still laps against its weathered stones, and deep beneath the dust of centuries, something may still be waiting. Somewhere along the vast, empty steppes of Eastern Europe, where the grasses ripple like waves beneath an endless sky, the campfires of the Huns once burned through the night. Their leader, Attila, known to Romans as the Scourge of God, commanded fear and fascination in equal measure. His name echoed across cities and forests, whispered behind crumbling walls from the Balkans to the gates of Constantinople. But for all his brutality in life, it is the silence of his death that continues to puzzle. How did the most feared warlord of his age die? Alone, in the night, on his wedding night. The year was 453 AD. Attila was at the height of his power. After decades of terrorizing both the Eastern and Western Roman empires, extracting tribute and laying waste to cities, he had become a force that neither Rome nor Constantinople could fully contain. His campaigns left entire provinces desolate. His enemies paid him in gold. And yet, at the pinnacle of his might, he died not on the battlefield, but in his bed. According to the 6th century historian Priscus, who traveled to Attila's court and recorded first-hand observations, the king died after celebrating his marriage to a young Gothic bride named Ildico. He drank heavily that night, as was custom. When his men entered the tent the next morning, they found Attila dead, his body untouched by any visible wound. Blood had poured from his nose and mouth. Ildico, we are told, was weeping in a corner. The cause of death? A ruptured blood vessel, they said. A nosebleed so violent he drowned in it while unconscious. But is that really all it was? To many, the explanation feels too simple, too clinical for a man whose life was surrounded by violence and legend. Can a mighty warlord truly bleed to death in his sleep? Or does this version of events conceal something far more complex? Some scholars accept the official account at face value. Heavy drinking, combined with high blood pressure or a congenital weakness, could indeed result in a fatal hemorrhage. In the absence of modern medicine, and especially while lying flat and unconscious, such a death is entirely plausible. No autopsy was ever conducted. No body was ever recovered, just the word of those who stood outside his tent. And yet, others are less convinced. Could Attila have been murdered? The most commonly named suspect is Ildico herself. A young woman from a people long subdued by Attila's rule, she may have harbored revenge in her heart. Some theorists speculate that she may have been a planted assassin, sent by Gothic rivals, or even with the covert support of the Eastern Roman Empire. A blade to the throat, a poisoned cup, or perhaps a concealed weapon designed to kill without leaving clear evidence. There is no proof, but the circumstances lend themselves to suspicion. Why else would Priscus, typically reserved in his commentary, choose to describe the scene with such eerie finality? Why emphasize the blood, the silence, the stillness? Others look within Attila's own camp for answers. As with any powerful ruler, there were those who stood to gain from his death. His empire, built more on personality and fear than on stable institutions, lacked a clear succession plan. His sons, Elac, Dengizich, and Ernok, would eventually fight among themselves, leading to the fragmentation and collapse of Hunnic power. Could one of them have acted early? Or could trusted advisors, seeing a future of instability and rebellion, have made the fatal decision themselves? And then there are the more symbolic readings. Some view Attila's death as part of a broader myth-making process. A warrior king who died not in battle, but on his wedding night, struck down by his own excesses or by divine judgment. Christian chroniclers in particular saw his death as poetic justice. A man who had caused rivers of blood in life, now drowned in his own. The framing of his end may have served a moral narrative more than a historical one. Others look to older traditions. In nomadic cultures of the Eurasian steppes, stories often describe great leaders dying mysteriously, their burials secret, their graves untouched. Attila's death fits this mold. His warriors are said to have buried him in secret, placing his body in a triple coffin, gold, silver, and iron, before diverting a river to conceal his tomb. The laborers who built it, we're told, were executed, so no one could reveal the location. To this day, his grave has never been found. Could clues to his death lie there, still buried beneath the soil of Hungary or Romania? Could his bones or artifacts reveal signs of foul play or confirm the old tale of a hemorrhage? The landscape holds its silence. The rivers have shifted. and the world he once ruled is long gone. The death of Attila the Hun is one of history's great contradictions. A life of thunder and conquest ended in quiet and ambiguity. No final battle, no monument, just a story told by others, written in the margins of empires he once threatened. So we ask, was Attila's end the result of chance, betrayal, or legend? Did the scourge of two empires die from a mere nosebleed, or from the blade of someone who knew he would not be missed? At the edge of the river, Derwent in northern England, the fields around Stamford Bridge rolled gently in the mist. It is a quiet place now, empty, peaceful, unassuming. But in the year 1066, it echoed with the clash of steel, the cries of dying men, and the fall of one of the last great Viking kings, Harald Hardrada. Tall, fearsome, and battle-scarred, Harald had once fought as a mercenary in the glittering palaces of Constantinople. He had ruled Norway with an iron hand, and when the throne of England became a prize for the taking, he sailed across the North Sea with hundreds of ships and thousands of warriors, dreaming of conquest. But the dream died at Stamford Bridge. On September 25th, 1066, in a sudden and brutal clash with King Harold Godwinson of England, Harald Hardrada was struck down, according to chroniclers, by an arrow to the throat. His army shattered, his claim ended, and with his death, the Viking Age itself seemed to draw its final breath. And yet, for all we know about the battle, one question has never been answered. What became of Harold's body? The sagas tell us he fell on the battlefield. Some sources claim that his remains were taken back to Norway. Others suggest he was buried nearby, but no grave has ever been found. No monument marks his resting place. No remains, royal or otherwise, have been identified as his. For a king of such stature, it is an absence that speaks volumes. So where is he? One theory holds that his body was indeed returned to Norway. According to Heimskringla, the 13th century Icelandic chronicle by Snorri Sturluson, his corpse was exhumed after the battle and transported across the sea to Nidaros, modern-day Trondheim, where he was laid to rest in Mary Church, which would later become the site of the grand Nidaros Cathedral. But there is a problem. No grave matching Harold's has ever been found within the cathedral. The church that supposedly held his remains was later replaced, renovated, and expanded over centuries, and records from that time are vague or non-existent. Could his tomb have been lost beneath the foundations? Perhaps. But excavations at the cathedral have revealed many burials, none positively identified as Harold's. Could he have been buried elsewhere? Some speculate that his body never left England. After the devastating defeat, few survivors remained to carry his remains home. The voyage would have been dangerous and slow, and the English had no interest in honoring a fallen invader. Could he have been buried in an unmarked grave near the battlefield? A simple mound, lost to time, overgrown and forgotten? Local legends in Yorkshire persist, of royal bones beneath the soil, of long-lost burial sites in churchyards or near ancient roads. But no archaeological evidence has ever confirmed these stories. The fields around Stamford Bridge have been searched, surveyed, and speculated upon. But the land keeps its secrets. Then there is a third, more speculative idea. Some believe that Harold's body was deliberately hidden, either as a way to protect it from desecration by his enemies, or as part of a political effort to preserve his memory as a heroic figure, rather than a defeated king. Perhaps a small band of loyal warriors buried him in secret, intending to return later. Perhaps they died before they could. Or perhaps the story was changed deliberately. The tale of Harold's return to Norway and burial in grandeur could have been constructed years later after his death to lend closure and nobility to a story that ended in chaos. kings need tombs, heroes need shrines. The absence of a body is too unsettling. Could the return to Norway have been a literary invention, an honorable lie? Still others look to folklore. In some remote corners of Scandinavia, stories persisted of a sleeping king, Harald, resting beneath a mountain, waiting to return in Norway's hour of need. These myths mirror legends across Europe of lost kings and hidden emperors. Arthur, Charlemagne, Frederick Barbarossa, figures whose deaths were so profound that people refused to let go. Could Harald have become one of them? But beneath the poetry and speculation, the question remains, where is he? Modern efforts to find his remains have faced challenges. Even with advanced ground-penetrating radar and historical analysis, the burial of a single man, especially one unmarked or hidden, remains elusive. Unlike Roman emperors or medieval saints, whose bones were often venerated and catalogued, Harald may have been claimed by the earth, his body decaying into silence. And yet, something about the mystery endures. Harald Hardrada was not merely a king. He was a symbol, a bridge between eras, a mercenary, a poet, a warrior, and a ruler. His death marked the end of one world and the beginning of another. Just weeks after Stamford Bridge, William the Conqueror would arrive in England, defeating Harold Godwinson at Hastings. The age of Viking invasions was over. A new chapter of history had begun. But for Harald, the end remains uncertain. The battle is recorded. The death is documented. But the body is missing. Is he still buried beneath the fields of Yorkshire, far from his homeland? Was he returned to Norway, only to vanish beneath the stones of a forgotten church? Or is his tomb still waiting to be discovered, hidden in plain sight, lost beneath layers of time and story? For now, the land keeps its silence. And the grave of Harald Hardrada, last of the great Viking kings, remains one of history's enduring absences. The sun rises slowly over the narrow pass at Thermopylae, casting golden light on the low hills and salt marshes that border the ancient battlefield. Today, it's a quiet place. Tourists walk its gravel paths, pausing to read plaques and gaze at the modern monument to King Leonidas, a bronze statue standing tall, spear in hand, facing east. But beneath this solemn calm lingers a silence more profound than any statue can explain. For somewhere beneath this earth, perhaps near the bones of the land itself, lie the remains of the 300 Spartans. And yet, their exact resting place has never been found. According to Herodotus, the historian who chronicled the Persian Wars, the final stand of the Spartans at Thermopylae in 480 BC was a moment of unmatched bravery. Led by King Leonidas, the 300 elite warriors, alongside a few hundred allies from Thespiae and Thebes, held the narrow pass against the massive army of Xerxes I. They fought to the last man, their sacrifice becoming the very embodiment of duty and defiance. Their valor was recorded, their memory celebrated. And yet, over 2,000 years later, the actual burial site of the 300, those who died in one of history's most iconic last stands, remains unknown. How can this be? Herodotus tells us that after the battle, the Persians mutilated Leonidas's body in anger and displayed it. Later, once the Persians were driven from Greece, the Spartans returned to Thermopylae. There they collected the remains of the fallen and erected a stone lion in honor of their king. A burial mound was constructed, and an inscription carved into stone. "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." This epitaph has echoed through the centuries, but where exactly was it placed? And what became of the mound that supposedly housed the remains of Leonidas and his men? In the modern area of Thermopylae, a cenotaph was erected in the 1950s. Behind the statue of Leonidas is a small mound, believed by some to be the spot where the Spartans made their final stand. A replica of the ancient epitaph was installed there, but this site is commemorative, symbolic. It is not confirmed to be the actual location of the burials. In fact, no confirmed grave has ever been uncovered. Excavations in the area have revealed remains, some burned, some buried, but none definitively linked to the Spartans. The challenge lies in the centuries of erosion, flooding, and seismic activity that have reshaped the terrain. The coastline has shifted significantly since antiquity. What was once a narrow pass between mountain and sea is now a broad plain covered in silt and sediment. The ancient battlefield lies buried, its precise contours lost to time. Could the burial mound still exist, buried beneath meters of earth? Could Leonidas and his warriors rest undisturbed somewhere nearby, awaiting discovery? Some archaeologists believe so. Ground-penetrating radar surveys have hinted at unusual formations beneath the surface. Ancient travelers and Roman-era historians also mention visiting a tomb or monument at the site, suggesting that at least for a time, a known grave did exist, but its traces may have vanished, disassembled by later invaders, covered by landslides, or simply eroded away. Others propose that the Spartans were never buried in the pass at all. There is speculation that, following tradition, their bones were returned to Sparta, perhaps secretly, perhaps long after the fact. The sacred ritual of bringing home the dead, especially a king, may have compelled the survivors or their descendants to recover what they could and carry it back to Laconia. But if this happened, no tomb in Sparta has ever been definitively identified as Leonidas's resting place. Interestingly, the ancient travel writer Pausanias, writing in the 2nd century AD, claimed to have visited the tomb of Leonidas in Sparta itself, alongside a monument to Pausanias, the victor of Plataea. Could this be the answer? Or had the memory already become myth by then, with shrines springing up in places of symbolic power rather than historical accuracy? There are even more speculative ideas. Some fringe theories suggest that the bodies were never recovered at all, that the Persian forces buried the dead in anonymous graves to erase their memory, or that the Greeks themselves allowed the site to return to the earth in sacred silence. Others propose that earthquakes may have buried the original burial mound beneath layers of debris, or that local communities reused the stone monument for later construction, erasing the physical markers of one of history's most famous battles. And then there is the possibility that the burial never occurred as described. What if Herodotus, writing decades after the fact, was repeating a poetic tradition rather than a factual account? What if the monument to the 300 was always metaphorical, more legend than reality? Could the lion of Leonidas have stood alone, without bones beneath it, a symbol rather than a sepulchre? Despite decades of study, no definitive answers have emerged. Modern researchers continue to survey the region using advanced imaging and topographical reconstruction to map what Thermopylae may have looked like in 480 BC. But as with many ancient mysteries, the trail grows colder with every century. The land shifts, memory fades, and what remains is not a tomb, but a story, etched not in stone, but in the imagination. And so we ask, where are the 300? Are they buried beneath the plains of Thermopylae, waiting silently beneath layers of mud and myth? Were their bones returned home in secret, now lost to time? Or have they become part of the landscape itself, heroes without graves, remembered not by stone but by legend? In the heart of modern-day Turkey, near the town of Boğazkale, lie the weathered ruins of Hattusa, a once mighty capital carved into a rocky plateau surrounded by forests and cliffs. Stone gates still stand, some decorated with the lion reliefs that once guarded this imperial center. Massive fortification walls curl like a serpent across the hills, but what was once the seat of an empire has long since crumbled into silence. The Hittites, masters of diplomacy, warriors of iron, and architects of one of the great Bronze Age civilizations, vanished almost entirely from history around 1200 BC. One moment they were sending letters to Egypt, negotiating treaties with Babylon, and controlling vast swaths of Anatolia and northern Syria. The next, their cities were burned, their records silenced, and their name almost forgotten for millennia. How does an empire that powerful simply disappear? At their peak, the Hittites rivaled Egypt and Assyria in strength and sophistication. Their empire stretched across the Anatolian plateau, commanded rich trade networks, and maintained complex diplomatic relationships through written treaties, some of which still survive today, pressed into clay and cuneiform script. Their legal codes were advanced, their gods many. Their king, often seen as the earthly representative of divine will, ruled through a centralized bureaucracy supported by governors, scribes, and military commanders. And yet, sometime around 1190 BC, Hattusa was abandoned. The royal archives stopped. The temples fell silent. And no one knows exactly why. Mainstream historians point to a convergence of calamities. The late Bronze Age collapse, an era of sweeping upheaval that also saw the fall of Mycenaean Greece, the destruction of Ugarit, and the weakening of Egypt, was marked by famine, war, natural disasters, and the enigmatic appearance of the so-called Sea Peoples. These migratory groups, whose origins remain uncertain, are recorded in Egyptian texts as sweeping across the eastern Mediterranean in waves of violence and disruption. Could the Hittites have fallen to these mysterious raiders? It's possible. Some evidence suggests that coastal Hittite cities were burned in this period. Trade routes were cut. Grain supplies from the Levant dwindled. And in a land already vulnerable to drought, food shortages may have devastated the population. Without grain, armies could not be fed. Cities could not be supported. Rebellions may have flared. But there's a problem. While many neighboring civilizations also suffered during this era, few vanished as completely as the Hittites. The Egyptians limped on. The Assyrians rebounded. Even the Mycenaeans, despite their decline, left ruins and burials that spoke of continuity. The Hittites, by contrast, seem to have simply ceased to exist at the imperial level. Hattusa was not gradually transformed. It was deserted. Its archives, once bustling with scribes and sealed correspondence, abruptly end. What happened? Some scholars suggest internal strife. Hittite succession was often complicated, riddled with palace intrigue, civil wars, and rival claims to the throne. Could a dynastic breakdown have fractured the empire from within? Perhaps governors declared independence, armies turned against one another, and the center could no longer hold. In the chaos, foreign enemies may have struck the final blow. Others turned to the climate. Dendrochronology, tree ring data, indicates that a severe, prolonged drought hit the region during the late 13th and early 12th centuries BC. In a land already challenged by rocky soils and thin agricultural margins, this may have pushed the system past its limits. Famine, population displacement, and economic collapse could have cascaded into social unrest. Then there are the tablets. Among the last clay tablets discovered at Hattusa are signs of desperation. They reference appeals for grain, warnings about unrest, omens, even one dramatic plea sent to Egypt requesting food aid. These records suggest a kingdom on the brink, but they don't explain why the capital was not merely defeated, but entirely erased from power and memory. And the Sea Peoples? Much of what we know about them comes from Egyptian inscriptions, most notably the records of Pharaoh Ramesses III, who claimed to have repelled them around 1175 BC. He describes them as a confederation of peoples arriving by land and sea, laying waste to cities and toppling kingdoms. Could they have struck Hattusa, burned the archives, broken the empire? But if so, why is there so little archaeological evidence of a great battle or decisive sack? Some argue that the Sea Peoples were less a military invasion than a wave of mass migrations, displaced peoples moving across collapsing landscapes, driven by famine or war elsewhere. In that case, the fall of the Hittites may have been part of a broader systemic failure across the Near East, an ecological and political domino effect where no single cause tells the whole story. Still others wonder, did the Hittites really disappear? There's growing evidence that while the Central Empire fell, its cultural legacy endured. In southeastern Anatolia and northern Syria, smaller Neo-Hittite city-states emerged in the centuries that followed, places like Carchemish and Melid. These kingdoms continued to use Hittite iconography and even the Luwian language, though their political connection to the fallen capital is unclear. Were these true successors? Refugees? Remnants? Or merely imitators of a once great empire? Even more intriguingly, the Hittites were forgotten entirely by later Greeks and Romans. Unlike the Egyptians or Babylonians, whose stories lived on in myth and memory, the Hittites vanished so completely that their rediscovery didn't happen until the 19th century, when archaeologists uncovered Hattusa and deciphered the cuneiform texts found in its ruins. For millennia, they were a lost civilization, known to the Bible as a vague name, but otherwise erased. Why was their memory so thoroughly wiped? Was it a deliberate act by their enemies? A collapse so total that even the idea of the Hittites was buried under the weight of new powers and languages? Or did the shifting sands of time simply swallow them without intention? One empire among many lost to drought, to war, to the quiet entropy of history. Today, the ruins of Hattusa remain eerily preserved. Carved lions still flank its gates. Stone foundations trace the shape of long-lost temples and palaces. Visitors walk where kings once strode, where scribes once pressed clay into knowledge. But the air hums with absence. No definitive answer has emerged. No single theory explains everything. The Hittite Empire, once a giant of the ancient world, slipped into silence with hardly a trace, and as we uncover its story piece by piece, one question remains. What really happened to the Hittites? Perhaps the truth lies beneath more dust. Perhaps it has already been written, waiting in a yet undiscovered archive. Or perhaps it is one of history's great vanishing points, where empires dissolve into shadows and the past chooses to remain silent. The air in the forests of northern France is heavy with silence. Among the fading stones of ancient monasteries and overgrown graveyards, the past lingers in a quiet kind of defiance, unwilling to be entirely forgotten. Somewhere here, perhaps beneath moss-covered earth or behind the veil of misremembered chronicles, may lie the final resting place of a princess whose story has faded into one of history's most delicate shadows. Anastasia of Kiev, daughter of Yaroslav the Wise, wife of King Andrew I of Hungary, and grandmother to future European rulers, was born into prestige and power in the 11th century. Her life, as recorded in fragments across chronicles and genealogical scrolls, seems at first clear enough. Yet as one follows the line of her story to its end, the trail grows unexpectedly dim. Where she died, when she died, even how she died, remain matters of speculation, scattered among conflicting records and the quiet loss of memory. Why does so little remain of a woman so closely entwined with royal bloodlines across Europe? Anastasia was born around 1023 AD in the court of Kievan Rus, one of the most influential cultural and political centers of Eastern Europe at the time. Her father, Yaroslav the Wise, sought to unite his dynasty with those of Western Europe. Through carefully arranged marriages, his daughters were wed to kings of France, Norway, and Hungary, creating a web of alliances meant to strengthen and stabilize his rule. Anastasia's own marriage to Andrew I of Hungary in the 1040s was not merely political, it was symbolic. She carried with her a rich cultural heritage, and her union with the Hungarian throne marked a moment of convergence between the Slavic East and Latin West. She became Queen Consort of Hungary, giving birth to Solomon, the future king. She was not a passive figure. Medieval records suggest she played a prominent role in her son's ascension and acted as regent during his minority. And yet, following Andrew's death and the turbulent years that followed, her presence in the annals of history begins to fade. Mentions of her grow scarce, then vanish. What happened to the Princess of Kiev? Some chronicles suggest that after her son Solomon was dethroned and her political role diminished, Anastasia retired from public life and sought refuge in a convent in northern France, perhaps near Admont, or even in the Abbey of Saint-Remy in Reims. Others place her final days in a monastery closer to her homeland, somewhere within the shifting borders of Rus's territory. Still others claim she returned to Hungary or died in exile, her fate quietly erased amid dynastic realignments. There are no definitive records of her burial, no surviving tombstone etched with her name, no royal decree commemorating her death, no preserved letters from her final years. This silence is strange, even unsettling, for a woman of her stature. Could her memory have been deliberately obscured? One theory suggests that Anastasia, deeply involved in court politics and implicated in her son's rise and fall, may have fallen afoul of shifting power structures. After Solomon was deposed, a new regime took control. Perhaps she was exiled, perhaps she was silenced. Records could have been lost or destroyed. But another possibility is more benign and more mysterious. Some believe she voluntarily withdrew from royal life, embracing a cloistered existence far from the intrigues of court. In the medieval world, it was not uncommon for noblewomen, especially those with fading political influence, to retire to religious communities. Within the stone walls of a convent, she could have found sanctuary. And yet, even these monastic records, usually meticulous in keeping track of noble patrons, are silent. There are whispers of a nun named Anastasia living in a remote French abbey in the early 12th century. Could this be her? Or simply a coincidence of names? Anastasia's story, unlike the more famous Romanovs of the 20th century, has no imposters, no false Anastasias appearing in distant courts. But the parallels are haunting. In both cases, a royal woman vanishes into the folds of history, her fate obscured, her resting place unknown. In recent decades, historians and genealogists have begun piecing together fragments, cross-referencing charters, monastic registries, and medieval letters in search of the missing queen. Still, no single document has emerged to offer certainty. Her name flickers briefly in 11th century texts, then disappears, as if carried away by the very winds of time. Why does her disappearance matter? Because Anastasia of Kiev was not a minor figure. Her bloodline carried the legacy of Rurik and the prestige of Eastern Europe's early Christian dynasties. Her marriage helped shape Hungary's royal heritage. Her offspring would influence politics across borders. And yet, in the end, she leaves us only with questions. Was she buried in a quiet chapel beneath a weathered cross, her identity known only to the monks who kept her final secrets? Or did she meet a more tragic fate? Forgotten, displaced, or erased from the records by the victors of her family's political downfall? In the echoes of her story, we find not just the mystery of a lost queen, but the fragility of memory itself. And so, the trail grows cold. The daughter of Yaroslav, the queen of Hungary, the mother of a king, a woman who lived at the crossroads of empires, whose name now lingers like a ghost in the pages of European history. What remains of her? A few scattered lines, a handful of possible graves, and the enduring silence of history's refusal to reveal its secrets. Perhaps, somewhere, hidden beneath the stone floor of a forgotten abbey or within the yet unread lines of a medieval scroll, the truth of Anastasia's final chapter still waits. And we are left to wonder, will we ever find her? Or will the fate of the Princess of Kiev remain one of history's quietest enigmas? High in the Andes, where the mountain peaks pierce the sky and the clouds roll in like waves upon stone, the remnants of a once great empire lie in silence. Moss-covered terraces stretch across steep slopes. Stone walls, so precisely cut and fitted that not even a blade of grass can slip between them, remain as testaments to an engineering brilliance long gone. And within this haunting stillness, a question endures. What became of the bloodline of the Inca? The Inca Empire, known to its people as Tawantinsuyu, was the largest empire in pre-Columbian America, stretching across what is now Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, Chile, and parts of Argentina and Colombia. At its height, it was a marvel of organization, infrastructure, and centralized power. Roads stretched over 25,000 miles. Food was stored in mountaintop granaries. The people spoke Quechua, the chosen language of the gods, and worshipped Inti, the sun deity, whose earthly representative was the Sapa Inca, an emperor believed to be descended from the divine. But when Francisco Pizarro and his conquistadors arrived in the 16th century, everything changed. The empire, already weakened by civil war and disease, was quickly overrun. Its temples were looted, its cities burned, its rulers executed or imprisoned. Yet while the fall of the empire is well documented, the fate of its royal bloodline is cloaked in mystery. We know that Atahualpa, the last undisputed emperor, was captured by Pizarro in 1532. Despite paying a ransom of gold and silver unlike anything the Spanish had ever seen, he was executed a year later. His brother, Tupac Hualpa, was briefly installed as a puppet ruler by the Spanish, but died under suspicious circumstances. Manco Inca Yupanqui, another brother, was crowned next, only to rebel and flee into the mountains of Vilcabamba, establishing the so-called Neo-Inca state, a final bastion of native resistance. Here, hidden deep in the jungle, the last true heirs of the Inca continued to rule for several decades. But even this shadow empire eventually fell. In 1572, the Spanish captured Tupac Amaru, the last Sapa Inca of Vilcabamba. He was brought to Cuzco and publicly executed. His death is often seen as the symbolic end of the Inca Empire. But is that where the bloodline truly ends? Officially, yes. Yet stories, rumors, and fragments of oral tradition hint at another possibility. What if some members of the royal family escaped deeper into the mountains? What if the bloodline continued, not in palaces or temples, but in remote villages, under assumed names, protected by those still loyal to the old ways? Even among the Spanish chroniclers, there were whispers of royal descendants who vanished from the record. Entire families who retreated beyond reach, blending into the Andean highlands. Some spoke of a child born in secret just before the fall of Vilcabamba, spirited away by priests to preserve the divine line. Others told tales of golden documents, Quipu records, hidden in caves, encoded with genealogies now lost to time. And then there is the matter of the supposed Inca artifacts found far from traditional centers of power. In the 19th and 20th centuries, explorers and archaeologists uncovered burial sites in the remotest parts of the Andes, far from any known settlement, containing richly adorned mummies wrapped in fine textiles and buried with solar iconography, suggestive of royal status. Were these members of the lost bloodline buried in exile, honored by secret followers? Modern genetic research has attempted to trace the lineage of the Incas. Some researchers have taken DNA samples from descendants of noble Cuzco families, who claim to be linked to the ancient dynasty. The results have been inconclusive. There is no definitive genetic marker for Inca royalty, but perhaps the problem lies not in the science, but in the erasure of records, the destruction of oral traditions, and the fear of revealing a lineage that for centuries could have meant death under Spanish rule. And then there's the legend of the hidden city of the Inca. Not Machu Picchu, which is a marvel in its own right, but another, deeper city, untouched, undiscovered, said to have been built by the royal family in hiding. Some believe it lies somewhere in the cloud forests beyond Vilcabamba, shielded by thick jungle and protected by the spirits of the ancestors. Expeditions have searched for it, some claiming vague traces, others returning empty-handed. Could such a city have existed? Could the descendants of the Sapa Inca have lived in seclusion for generations, maintaining their rituals and beliefs while the world changed around them? In recent years, local communities in the Andes have begun to re-embrace their Inca heritage more openly. Some elders still recite royal lineages passed down orally, though the names and places have often shifted or become obscured by time. Rituals are performed that mirror those of the ancient court: solar ceremonies, offerings to the Apus, the mountain spirits, and celebrations of Inti Raymi, the sun festival. Yet even here, amid the cultural revival, the bloodline remains elusive. It is spoken of with reverence, but rarely with certainty. There is a sense that something sacred was lost, or hidden so well that even its memory flickers only faintly. And so we return to the mountains, to the mist that clings to the stone ruins of Choquequirao, to the forgotten trails that wind through the high Andes, marked by stones worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Somewhere out there, perhaps in a village untouched by modern maps, or in a burial chamber sealed for centuries, the truth of the Inca bloodline may still rest. Did it die with Tupac Amaru on the gallows of Cusco? Or does it live on, quietly, invisibly, woven into the lives of those who still call the Andes home? The Spanish conquest may have silenced the empire, but some mysteries whisper still. And the story of the Inca, like the mountains that cradled their civilization, remains vast, layered, and full of secrets. What if the royal bloodline of the Sapa Inca was never truly lost, only hidden, waiting for the world to listen again? Amid the rolling grasslands of the Eurasian steppe, where winds whisper across endless plains and the horizon blurs into a golden haze, there lies a world buried beneath the soil, a world of warriors, horses, and glittering gold. Here, in the ancient burial mounds known as kurgans, archaeologists have uncovered treasures so intricate, so unexpectedly sophisticated, that they raise a question that no one has yet been able to answer. Who was the master goldsmith behind the greatest works of Scythian art? The Scythians, nomadic horsemen who dominated the steppes from around the 9th to the 2nd century BC, left few written records. Their presence survives instead in fragments, scattered bones, weathered weapons, and above all, astonishing ornaments wrought in precious metal. The most breathtaking examples have been unearthed from deep within kurgans in places like Ukraine, southern Russia, and Kazakhstan. In these tombs, once reserved for chieftains and nobility, lie objects that defy expectations. Golden plaques depicting fierce animals in combat, brooches and torques woven with impossible delicacy, and ceremonial gear adorned with scenes of myth and power. One piece stands out among them: a small golden comb discovered in the Soloka kurgan in the early 20th century. At first glance, it appears simple, a utilitarian object. But look closer, and a world comes into focus. Crowning the comb is a miniature battle scene. 3 warriors frozen in combat, captured in astonishing detail. Muscles tense, hair braided, weapons drawn. Each figure is not only proportioned with anatomical precision, but animated with a dynamic, almost cinematic intensity. It is a scene not just crafted, but composed, as if by an artist with a mastery of narrative and metal alike. Who, in this harsh and mobile society, possessed the skill and the vision to create such things? The Scythians were nomads, but their art rivals the finest work of sedentary civilizations. This contradiction has puzzled scholars for decades. How could a culture without cities, without known permanent workshops, produce some of the most sophisticated goldwork of the ancient world? Could the Scythians themselves have trained such artisans in the wild reaches of the steppe? Or was the artist, this unknown genius, someone else entirely? Some theories point to Greek influence. The Black Sea colonies of the Greeks, such as Olbia and Panticapaeum, were known to trade with the Scythians. Greek craftsmen, familiar with fine metalwork, could have served as intermediaries, creating luxury goods tailored to Scythian tastes. The hybrid style of many gold pieces, blending Hellenic naturalism with Scythian motifs, seems to support this. But there is a problem. Many of the most intricate works were buried deep inland, far from Greek colonies, in territories rarely frequented by Mediterranean artisans. Other theories suggest that a school of native Scythian goldsmiths may have existed. Artists who, despite their people's nomadic lifestyle, were trained and protected as state assets, traveling with the elite or operating in secret locations. These hypothetical figures would have been both highly specialized and highly mobile, masters of metallurgy working in tents, not temples. But no such workshop has ever been found. Not a single tool, not a mold, not even a discarded fragment. Just finished masterpieces, buried, not displayed, left behind like whispers of a forgotten hand. Still more mysterious is the stylistic unity across vast distances. Golden plaques from Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and southern Siberia often show not only similar motifs, such as stylized panthers, stags, and eagle-headed griffins, but similar techniques. The same use of granulation, the same coiling of lines to suggest fur, the same symbolic syntax. Could it be that there was one master, or a singular school, whose influence extended across thousands of miles? Some speculate that these designs were passed down by oral instruction, much like Scythian lore itself. Others propose that goldsmiths may have moved between tribes, serving multiple chiefs and spreading a distinct artistic language across the steppes. Still, the mystery remains. How was such consistency preserved in a culture with no known script, no blueprints, and no enduring monuments? And then there is the question of meaning. The Scythian gold objects are not merely decorative, they are deeply symbolic. Predators in mortal combat, animals shown in trance-like stillness, hybrids of man and beast. Scholars have interpreted them as expressions of animism, shamanic visions, or cosmological myths now lost to us. But the hands that shaped them must have understood more than just form. They understood story. Which leads us back again to the carver. Not merely a technician, but a visionary. Could this enigmatic figure have been a shaman as well as a smith? A keeper of sacred imagery? Or perhaps the Scythian gold carver was not a Scythian at all, but a foreign captive, taken in battle and kept alive for his skill, producing treasures for his captors until his death? The truth is, we do not know. We may never know. All we have are the objects, and they do not speak. They glint in museum lights, silent and magnificent, bearing witness to a mystery buried deeper than any tomb, the identity of the hand that forged them. And so, we are left to wonder. Was the Scythian gold carver one person or many? A native son of the steppe, or a stranger taken from far-off lands? Was their craft a solitary endeavor, or part of a network now lost to time? And if one such genius could arise in the windswept wilds of ancient Eurasia, how many others vanished, their work undiscovered beneath centuries of dust? The steppe keeps its secrets well, but in every curling tendril of gold, every beast locked in eternal motion, a voice still whispers. Who carved this, and why did they choose to leave no name? In the quiet countryside of Suffolk, England, nestled between rolling fields and hedgerows, lies a village so small it could easily be overlooked. Its name is Woolpit, derived from wolf pits, deep traps once dug in the earth to protect livestock from predators. Today, it is a peaceful rural settlement, marked by simple cottages, narrow lanes, and the soft rustle of wind through barley. But in the heart of this ordinary English village echoes a story so strange, so quietly unsettling, that it has puzzled historians and folklorists for centuries. It begins, like many mysteries, without warning. Sometime in the 12th century, during the reign of King Stephen, or possibly King Henry II, depending on the chronicle you consult, villagers working in the fields near one of these old wolf pits came upon a strange and bewildering sight. 2 children had appeared, one boy, one girl, standing alone near the edge of the pit. They were dressed in unfamiliar clothes made from materials and colors no one recognized. They spoke no known language, but most striking of all was the color of their skin, a deep, unmistakable green. They were not sickly or disfigured, but their hue was unnatural, almost vegetal, like the color of spring leaves or watercress. Frightened, the villagers brought them to the manor of Sir Richard de Colney, a local landowner. There, attempts were made to communicate, to understand who they were, where they came from, and what had brought them to Woolpit. At first, the children refused all food. They would not eat the bread or meat they were offered. Only when they were given raw beans, still in their stalks, did they finally eat, ravenously. Over time, the children began to adapt. The green hue of their skin slowly faded. They began to learn English, and with language came the first fragmentary explanations. The girl, who survived longer than her brother, claimed that she and her brother had come from a place called St. Martin's Land. It was a twilight realm, she said, where the sun never fully rose and everything was dim and green. They had been tending their father's flocks, she explained, when they followed the sound of bells through a long, dark tunnel. When they emerged, they were here, in Woolpit, with the bright sun hurting their eyes and strange people speaking strange words. But what was St. Martin's Land? Was it simply a child's confused memory, shaped by trauma? Or had the children come from somewhere else? Over the years, many have tried to explain the green children of Woolpit. Some historians suggest they were the orphaned children of Flemish immigrants, refugees from persecution during the chaos of King Stephen's civil war. Their language, unfamiliar to local ears, could have been a dialect of Dutch. Their green hue might have been the result of malnutrition, possibly chlorosis, a form of iron deficiency that gives the skin a greenish tint. The children's odd clothing and behavior could be chalked up to cultural and linguistic isolation. But while this theory provides a rational framework, it doesn't sit comfortably with every detail. The girl's account of a twilight world beneath the earth has led some to more fantastical theories, suggesting the children emerged from a subterranean civilization or even from another dimension entirely. In the 20th century, the tale gained attention among paranormal researchers and writers who proposed connections to everything from fairies to interdimensional travel. Was St. Martin's Land a metaphor for an underground world? Or a misremembered name for a monastery, a village, or even a forgotten settlement lost to time? And what of the tunnel? Could the children have wandered through mine shafts or ancient warrens beneath the earth? Could they have been separated from their people during a collapse, or emerged from a hidden place now lost beneath centuries of sediment and stone. Others interpret the tale symbolically. In medieval Europe, the color green was associated with the wild, the untamed, and the otherworldly. Green-skinned figures appeared in folklore, often representing beings not quite human, strangers from the margins of the known world. Could the chroniclers who recorded the tale, Ralph of Coggeshall and William of Newburgh, have shaped the narrative to reflect cultural anxieties about outsiders, foreigners, or the mysterious forested places beyond the village? Yet there is something quietly haunting in the fact that two separate medieval writers, working independently, recorded the same basic account with enough detail to suggest more than mere fable. This was not a ghost story passed around a hearth. It was treated as a curiosity, an event that defied easy explanation. What became of the girl? Records say she lived for many years, becoming more normal with time. She worked in the service of the de Calny family, learned English fluently, and according to one account, eventually married a man from King's Lynn. Her brother, the boy, did not survive long after their discovery. He died not long after they were found, perhaps weakened by whatever ordeal had brought them here. And then, the trail ends. The girl's name is not recorded. Her descendants, if she had any, remain unknown. And with her death, the story becomes silence once more. The green children of Woolpit remain one of history's quietest enigmas. Their tale is not one of kings or empires, but of two small figures who appeared where they should not have been, who spoke in riddles and carried a color no human should bear. Was their story a misunderstanding, a medical anomaly, a cultural fable? Or was it something stranger still, an encounter with a world parallel to our own? In the fields of Suffolk, beneath the roots of ancient hedgerows and the furrows of modern plows, there may yet lie clues. A lost tunnel, a forgotten bell, or perhaps nothing at all. Still, we wonder, where did they come from? And if they found a way into our world, is the path still open? In the heart of central Italy, the land undulates in gentle hills and cypress-lined ridges. Vineyards stretch into the horizon, and olive groves shimmer under the sun. Beneath this picturesque Tuscan landscape lie the remnants of a civilization older than Rome, richer in mystery and hauntingly silent, etched into stone tombs, bronze mirrors, and painted pottery. This is the land of the Etruscans. Before there was a Roman Republic, before the name Italy held any meaning, the Etruscans flourished here. They built cities on hilltops, carved necropolises into volcanic rock, and governed a confederation of powerful city-states. Their influence was immense. They taught the Romans how to build roads, how to design temples, how to read the skies for omens. Yet, despite their impact, one question continues to echo unanswered through the centuries. Who were the Etruscans, really? From the very beginning, their origin puzzled the ancient world. The Greek historian Herodotus claimed they came from Lydia, in Anatolia, forced to migrate westward across the sea due to famine. According to him, they were foreigners, Easterners, who brought their language, their gods, and their customs with them. But others, like Dionysius of Halicarnassus, argued the opposite. He believed the Etruscans were indigenous to Italy, a people shaped by the land itself, with no ties to foreign soil. Archaeology offers both clarity and confusion. Etruscan artifacts date back to at least the 8th century BC, and their culture emerged from the earlier Villanovan culture of Italy. Their art reflects both local traditions and influences from Greece, Phoenicia, and the Near East. But this mixture complicates the narrative. Were they native Italians absorbing foreign styles through trade, or immigrants adapting to a new homeland? Then there is the language. Etruscan is unlike any other tongue in Italy, or Europe, for that matter. It is not Indo-European, and it does not neatly fit with Latin, Greek, or Celtic. Despite thousands of inscriptions, on tombs, vases, mirrors, and ceremonial objects, the language remains largely untranslated. We know how to pronounce it. We can read their letters, but we cannot fully grasp the grammar or the deep meaning of most words. The Etruscans remain, quite literally, a people whose voice we cannot truly hear. Some linguists have tried to link Etruscan to the Lemnian language, found on a handful of inscriptions from the Greek island of Lemnos. If true, this might support Herodotus's theory of an Eastern origin. Others propose connections to the Rhaetian language of the Alps, or to more obscure languages from the Aegean. And some insist the Etruscans were unique, an isolated linguistic island born in Italy, shaped by trade but genetically and culturally distinct. Modern genetics has entered the debate. In recent years, DNA studies have examined Etruscan remains. The results? Conflicting. Some suggest genetic continuity between Etruscans and earlier populations in Italy, supporting the idea of local origins. Others have found markers consistent with Near Eastern ancestry, adding weight to the migration theory. But genetics, like archaeology, cannot always tell a clear-cut story. Populations move, mix, evolve. What does it mean to be from somewhere if the answer lies thousands of years in the past? Even in death, the Etruscans preserve their enigma. Their tombs are elaborate, carved to resemble houses, painted with scenes of music, dancing, feasting, celebrations of life, not mourning. They left behind bronze mirrors inscribed with cryptic phrases, sarcophagi with serene faces and names we cannot understand. In Tarquinia, Cerveteri, and other sites, entire cities of the dead remain silent and sealed, waiting. What secrets lie hidden beneath these mounds? And what of their gods? The Etruscans believed the world was governed by divine will, that omens could be read in the flight of birds or the entrails of animals. Their religion was detailed and codified, far more complex than early Roman beliefs. They had gods unknown to Rome, rituals that the Romans adopted but never truly understood. Who taught the Etruscans this system? Where did it originate? And why did they hold such reverence for prophecy and the signs of nature? By the time Rome rose to power, the Etruscans were already fading. Assimilated, conquered, and absorbed into the growing republic, their cities were Romanized, their language suppressed, their temples repurposed. And yet, traces remain. In Rome's early kings, many of whom were Etruscan, in the Latin alphabet, adapted from Etruscan script, in the curved arches of aqueducts, in rituals the Romans performed long after they had forgotten where they came from. Is it possible the Etruscans were never one people at all, but a network of tribes, some local, some migrant, who coalesced into a culture so distinct that it defied categorization? Or are we simply looking through too narrow a lens, trying to fit an ancient world into modern frameworks of ethnicity and geography? Their own stories may never be fully recovered. Their books, written on linen or wax tablets, have vanished. Only a few fragments remain, strips of writing used to wrap mummies in Egypt, buried in tombs, or etched into objects whose meaning has been lost to time. And so, the mystery deepens. In a landscape where vineyards now grow and tourists walk ancient stones, we are left with more questions than answers. Who were these people who flourished before Rome, who left behind no epic conquests or written histories, but whose fingerprints are still embedded in the very foundations of Western civilization? Where did the Etruscans truly come from? And if the land still remembers, will it ever speak again? In the rugged heart of central Norway, where the forests stretch deep and the rivers carve through the mountains like veins of ice, a battle once took place that would alter the course of a nation. The fields of Stiklestad, silent now except for the wind rustling through grass and the occasional call of a distant bird, were once soaked with the blood of kings and rebels. It was here, in the year 1030, that King Olaf II Haraldsson, later known as Saint Olaf, met his end. But how he died, and why, remains a puzzle as enduring as the shifting mists that settle over the valley. At the time, Olaf was a Christian king ruling over a land still deeply divided by the old Norse gods and the new faith he sought to impose. He had once united much of Norway under his banner, but his reign was harsh and uncompromising. He outlawed the old pagan rituals. He burned sacred groves. He punished those who resisted his god. When he was driven into exile by powerful noble families allied with Denmark, Olaf fled east to Kiev and Rus, where he waited, watched, and eventually returned. His goal was clear, to reclaim his throne, but his timing was questionable. The people of Norway had not forgotten his rule. Many of them had not forgiven it. On July 29, 1030, Olaf marched into battle at Stiklestad, with a force made up largely of loyalists and foreign mercenaries. Opposing him was a much larger army of local farmers, nobles, and warriors, many of whom had once served him. The battle was fierce, chaotic, and by all surviving accounts, brief. Olaf was struck down in the fighting, pierced by multiple weapons, said to be a spear to the belly, an axe to the leg, and finally a sword to the neck. But here is where the mystery begins. The details of his death, passed down through sagas and clerical accounts, are laced with contradictions, embellishments, and symbolic overtones. Some sources say he died like a martyr, facing his enemies with unwavering faith. Others suggest he was betrayed by his own men, perhaps even assassinated under the guise of battle. Could it be that Olaf never stood a chance, that his return to Norway had been a carefully laid trap from the start? And then there's the matter of his sanctification. Almost immediately after his death, tales of miracles began to circulate. The blind were said to see at the site of his fall. The sick were healed by touching objects associated with him. His body, when exhumed a year later, was reportedly found to be incorrupt, his skin fresh, his hair and nails still growing. Such accounts were seized upon by the church, which soon canonized him. Olaf became Saint Olaf, the eternal king of Norway, the Christian martyr who brought the gospel north. But how much of this was faith? And how much was politics? The church needed a native saint. Christianity in Scandinavia was still fragile. What better symbol than a fallen king who died trying to bring the light of Christ to a resistant people? The narrative served many. It unified Norway under a single faith. It lent legitimacy to rulers who claimed descent from Olaf's line. And it turned a potentially embarrassing failure, a king killed by his own countrymen, into a holy triumph. Yet, questions linger. The sources closest to Olaf's time are sparse and silent on many details. Much of what we know comes from sagas written a century or more later, rich in poetry, drama, and hagiographic tone. These stories often blur the line between history and legend. Did Olaf really perform miracles from beyond the grave? Or were these tales shaped by monks and kings, with much to gain from his deification? Even the location of his burial adds another layer of intrigue. His body was said to have been moved to Trondheim, then Nidaros, where a great cathedral was later built over his supposed resting place. Pilgrims flocked to the site for centuries, but modern archaeologists have never conclusively identified his remains. Bones attributed to Saint Olaf may exist, but their authenticity is uncertain. Could his tomb have been emptied, moved, or substituted over the centuries for political reasons? Or is his body still hidden somewhere beneath the cathedral, lost in the layered history of conquest, fire, and rebuilding? Some fringe theories even speculate that Olaf faked his death, escaping once again into exile, perhaps to die in anonymity, far from the land he once ruled. There is little to support such claims, but their persistence reveals something deeper. A yearning to explain the unexplainable, to peel back the layers of myth and find the man beneath the martyr. And so, nearly 1,000 years later, we are left with echoes in the sagas, in the worn stones of Nidaros Cathedral, in the pilgrimage paths that still cross the Norwegian countryside. Was Olaf a ruthless tyrant or a holy reformer, a martyr for Christ or a casualty of civil strife? Was his death a moment of divine destiny or of political calculation? What truly happened on that summer day at Stiklestad? And why does the answer still elude us, buried like so many bones beneath centuries of soil and story? In the dense woodlands of northern Germany, where thick canopies still cast deep shadows over moss-covered ground, whispers of a catastrophe linger in the trees. The Teutoburg forest, remote and brooding, was once the scene of one of Rome's greatest military disasters. It was here, in the year 9 AD, that 3 entire Roman legions were wiped out, an event so devastating that it sent tremors through the heart of the empire and haunted Emperor Augustus for the rest of his life. Among the many losses suffered that day was something more than men, more than armor and weaponry. It was a symbol, one of the most sacred objects in Roman military tradition. The battle standard, the aquila, an eagle cast in gold, carried at the head of each legion, revered not merely as a rallying point, but as the very soul of Rome's military might. And when the legions of Publius Quinctilius Varus vanished into the boggy soil of the Germanic wilderness, so too did their eagles. Of these, the most elusive is the standard of the 17th Legion, the most senior of the 3 annihilated in the ambush. Its whereabouts have remained a mystery for over 2 millennia, while 2 of the eagles were reportedly recovered in the years following the defeat, one by Germanicus during his retaliatory campaigns. The standard of the 17th was never seen again. How could something so revered simply vanish? The Roman military placed immense spiritual value on the aquila. It was not just a marker of command, it was a divine embodiment of Roman glory. To lose it was considered a grave dishonor. Recovering a lost eagle, on the other hand, was a triumph in itself, worthy of statues and song. That the eagle of the 17th has remained lost adds a weight of sacred mystery to its absence. What happened in the forest that day is as much a story of betrayal as it is of war. Varus, governor of Germania, marched his legions through difficult terrain, believing he was moving to quell a minor uprising. He trusted Arminius, a Germanic chieftain raised and trained by the Romans themselves. But Arminius had turned. He led the legions into an ambush, exploiting their unfamiliarity with the land and the relentless autumn rains. What followed was not a battle, but a massacre stretched across several days of horror. Roman order unraveled, shield walls broke, cavalry bogged down, baggage trains were abandoned, and somewhere in the confusion, amid the cries, the mud, the blood, the standards disappeared. But were they taken or hidden? Some accounts suggest that the Germanic tribes, after their victory, buried the standards as part of a ritual, believing them cursed or too dangerous to keep. Others hint that the eagles were kept as trophies, possibly passed from one chieftain to another, their gleaming wings symbolizing triumph over Rome. Could one still lie in a chieftain's long-lost burial mound, hidden beneath centuries of forest growth? The forest itself guards its secrets well. Despite centuries of searching, archaeologists have only recently begun to piece together the likely location of the battle. Finds have included coins bearing Varus's image, shattered weapons, and even Roman skeletons, but never the aquila. Could it have been taken far from the battlefield, smuggled out, bartered, or melted down? The notion is tempting, but also tragic. To imagine the eagle reforged into ornaments or weapons strips it of its symbolic weight. Yet, in a time of brutal practicality, would a Germanic chieftain have cared for Roman sentiment? Then there are the more speculative whispers. Some believe the eagle was hidden by a surviving Roman soldier, buried out of desperation to protect it from capture, intending to return. Perhaps it lies beneath a lone hill, forgotten but not destroyed. Others theorize it was secreted away by the Roman Church in later centuries, recovered in silence and hidden in a vault to preserve its sacredness. Such theories edge into the mythical, but they reflect a deeper truth. The mystery of the missing eagle endures not only because of what it was, but because of what it meant, and what it still means. For Rome, the loss of the standards was more than military defeat. It was spiritual rupture. Augustus mourned it not just with state ceremonies, but with personal anguish. He was said to wander the halls of his palace crying, "Quintili vare, legiones rede. Quintilius varus, give me back my legions." He never got them back, and Rome would never again push so deeply into Germania. The frontier had spoken. The wild lands across the Rhine would remain beyond the empire's grasp, untamed and unknowable. But the eagle, it may still be out there, somewhere beneath the forest floor, or hidden in an ancient hoard, or lost to time entirely. Its fate remains one of the most tantalizing riddles of Roman history. Was it burned in a ritual, buried for the gods, displayed in a chieftain's hall to inspire awe or fear? Or is it still waiting to be found, its golden wings folded beneath the earth, untouched since that fateful autumn over 2,000 years ago? And if so, what forgotten story will it finally tell? Beneath the shifting sands of Egypt, where the desert wind sweeps across forgotten necropolises and the sun casts long shadows over half-buried stones, a peculiar discovery has stirred new wonder and new questions. In recent years, archaeologists excavating tombs from the Greco-Roman period near Alexandria and Taposiris Magna have uncovered something both exquisite and eerie. Human remains buried with tongues made of pure gold. The objects are small, thin, leaf-like impressions of precious metal placed delicately within the mouths of the dead. Some lie beneath decaying jawbones, others are found nestled between clenched teeth. At first glance, they resemble nothing more than decorative inlays or ritual offerings. But as more have been discovered, and as similar finds have emerged across different burial sites, the mystery deepens. Why would someone be buried with a golden tongue? And more hauntingly, what were they hoping to say? Gold in ancient Egypt was not just a symbol of wealth. It was the flesh of the gods, eternal, untarnishing, incorruptible. The pharaohs used it to signify divine power, and it adorned temples, sarcophagi, and ceremonial masks. But the tongue, that was something different. It was not a symbol of rule, but of voice. The golden tongues seem to appear during a transitional period in Egypt's long and complex history, when Greek, Roman, and native Egyptian cultures were blending, sometimes harmoniously, sometimes not. These were centuries marked by religious hybridization, where Osiris met Dionysus, and Isis was worshipped in temples from Egypt to Gaul. It was a time of shifting beliefs, and with it, shifting funerary practices. The prevailing theory suggests that the golden tongue was meant to help the deceased speak in the afterlife, perhaps specifically to the god Osiris, the ruler of the underworld. In ancient Egyptian belief, the journey after death was perilous and filled with trials. One had to prove their worth, recite sacred spells, and defend their soul during the weighing of the heart. A tongue of gold, it was thought, might ensure eloquence or favor. But if that were the case, why do we not find golden tongues in the great tombs of earlier dynasties? Why does this custom only appear much later, and only sporadically? Could it be that these were not just ritual objects, but markers, signifiers of a special class, a secret sect, or a buried esoteric belief. Some scholars have posited that the practice may reflect an underground religious movement, one not officially sanctioned, a hidden order that believed the tongue, as the instrument of truth and invocation, needed to be preserved in the most eternal form possible. Others suggest the influence came from outside Egypt altogether, from Greek mystery cults or Roman funerary symbolism. In Greco-Roman funerals, coins were placed in the mouth to pay Charon, the ferryman of the dead. Perhaps the tongue of gold was a localized variation of that same belief, a way to pay not with money, but with speech. A golden promise, an eternal word, a voice that could never be silenced. Yet the mystery remains. Only a handful of these artifacts have been found, and they vary slightly in design and placement. Some are carefully shaped to fit the human tongue. Others are roughly cut, almost improvised. Were these custom-made for elite individuals, or hurriedly prepared for those whose families feared their loved one might be left voiceless in the afterlife? Even stranger, some of the burials include mummies with golden eye plaques and golden scarabs placed on the chest. In one case, a perfectly preserved mask made of gold leaf covered the face entirely, leaving only the tongue to glimmer from beneath. Was this a language of symbols? A coded message for the gods? Or for the dead themselves? Modern analysis reveals that the tongues are made from high-quality gold, hammered thin and often shaped by hand. No inscriptions, no writing, just the smooth, featureless surface of precious metal. Silent, yet unmistakably present. The dead, it seems, had something important to say. But what? Was it a plea? A confession? A final declaration of love, loyalty, or penance? Or was it protection? Ensuring that no matter what horrors waited on the other side, the bearer could speak clearly, powerfully, and in a language even the gods could not ignore. One cannot help but imagine the burial itself, a quiet chamber lit by flickering oil lamps, the hush of priests chanting spells from the Book of the Dead, a grieving family watching as a tongue of gold is placed beneath the lips of someone they once knew. Perhaps they believed, in that moment, that their loved one would speak not as a shadow, but as a being of light, golden, eternal, unforgotten. Today, these tongues rest in museum cases or excavation crates. They no longer speak, but they still whisper. Of forgotten rituals, lost beliefs, and a civilization that understood death not as silence, but as transformation. And so the mystery lingers. Why were these tongues given to the dead? What did they hope to say, and to whom? And most intriguingly, what might still lie buried beneath the sands, waiting to reveal not just a golden object, but a golden voice, long silenced, but never forgotten?